In the dead of night, a blood-curdling scream shatters the eerie silence of Styles Court, a grand English estate steeped in secrets. Who poisoned Emily Inglethorpe, the formidable matriarch, behind her locked bedroom door? Was it her suspiciously charming younger husband, Alfred, or her restless stepson, John, desperate for her fortune? Perhaps the quiet companion, Cynthia, or the enigmatic Mary Cavendish hides a deadly truth. As whispers of betrayal and a forged will surface, Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps into the shadows of this tangled web, with a spilled coffee cup, a hidden key, and a burnt letter as his only clues. Can Poirot unravel the mystery before the killer strikes again? Dive into the mysterious affair at Styles, where every glance is a suspect, and every clue raises more questions than answers. Chapter 1. The arrival at Styles Court. The summer sun hung low over the rolling Essex countryside, casting a golden haze across the fields as I stepped off the train at the small, sleepy station of Styles St. Mary. My leg, still stiff from a wound sustained in the trenches, protested with a dull ache as I hauled my modest suitcase onto the platform. The air carried the scent of freshly cut hay, mingled with the faint tang of engine smoke, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia for simpler days. I, Arthur Hastings, late of His Majesty's army, was no longer a soldier but a man adrift, seeking respite after the horrors of war. My old friend John Cavendish had extended an invitation to Styles Court, his family's estate, and I had accepted with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Little did I know that this visit would plunge me into a web of intrigue far more complex than any battlefield. The station was deserted save for a porter lounging against a wall, his cap tilted lazily over his eyes. I signaled for a taxi, and soon a rattling old motorcar carried me along winding lanes bordered by hedgerows bursting with wildflowers. The countryside unfolded in gentle undulations, dotted with grazing sheep and the occasional farmhouse, their chimneys puffing thin streams of smoke into the evening sky. As we approached Styles Court, the estate loomed into view, a sprawling Elizabethan manor of red brick and ivy, its tall chimneys and mullioned windows exuding an air of faded grandeur. The gravel drive crunched under the tires as we pulled up to the entrance, where a heavy oak door stood flanked by stone urns overflowing with geraniums. John Cavendish greeted me at the door, his familiar grin breaking through the lines of care that had etched themselves into his face since our school days. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man of about 40, with a hearty manner that masked a certain restlessness in his eyes. "Hastings, old chap," he exclaimed, clapping me on the shoulder. "Good to see you. Come in, Mother's eager to meet you, though I warn you, she's in one of her moods." "Mother?" I asked, stepping into the cool, shadowed hall. The interior was as grand as the exterior promised, with polished oak paneling and a sweeping staircase that curved upward to a gallery lined with portraits. A faint scent of beeswax and lavender hung in the air, mingling with the musty odor of old books. "The stepmother, to be precise," John clarified, leading me toward a drawing room. "Emily Inglethorpe. She married my father when Lawrence and I were boys. Runs the place like a general. Now that father's gone, you'll see." The drawing room was a study in opulence, its walls adorned with gilt-framed landscapes and its furniture upholstered in rich damask. A fire crackled in the grate, despite the warmth of the evening, casting flickering shadows across the room. Seated near the hearth was a woman of imposing presence, Emily Inglethorpe. She was perhaps 60, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a posture that suggested both authority and vigilance. Her hair, still dark but streaked with silver, was swept into an elegant chignon, and her dress of deep burgundy rustled as she rose to greet me. "Captain Hastings," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "Welcome to Styles Court. John has spoken of you often. I trust your journey was pleasant." "Very much so, Mrs. Inglethorpe," I replied, bowing slightly. "Thank you for your hospitality." She inclined her head, her gaze assessing me with a keenness that made me feel as though she could see straight through to my thoughts. "We are a quiet household," she said, "but I hope you'll find it restful. Do join us for dinner. We keep early hours here." As she spoke, a man entered the room, and I felt an immediate shift in the atmosphere. He was slight, with a neatly trimmed beard and a manner that seemed both obsequious and calculating. His eyes, small and darting, fixed on me briefly before turning to Emily with a smile that struck me as overly familiar. "Alfred, this is Captain Hastings," Emily said, her tone cooling noticeably. "Captain, my husband." Alfred Inglethorpe shook his hand, noting the softness of his grip and the faint scent of pomade that clung to him. Alfred was at least 20 years younger than his wife, a fact that did not escape my notice. Nor, I suspected, the notice of anyone else in the room. His suit was impeccably tailored, but there was something about his demeanor too smooth to polish that set my nerves on edge. "Delighted, Captain," Alfred said, his voice carrying a faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. "Trust you'll find Styles to your liking." Before I could respond, two more figures appeared. John's wife, Mary Cavendish, a striking woman with auburn hair and a cool, reserved smile, and Lawrence Cavendish, John's younger brother, a lanky man with a dreamy air and a habit of fidgeting with his spectacles. The final member of the party was Cynthia Murdoch, a vivacious young woman introduced as Emily's ward, whose bright eyes and quick laugh brought a spark of warmth to the room. Dinner was a formal affair, served in a dining room dominated by a long mahogany table and a chandelier that glittered like a constellation. The conversation was polite but strained, with undercurrents of tension I couldn't quite fathom. Emily presided over the meal with the air of a monarch, directing the flow of talk with subtle gestures and pointed questions. John spoke of estate matters, his tone clipped when addressing Alfred, who seemed oblivious to the hostility. Mary's responses were curt, her eyes often drifting to the window as if seeking escape. Lawrence, meanwhile, murmured vaguely about poetry and art, earning a sharp glance from his stepmother. Only Cynthia seemed at ease, chatting animatedly about her work at the local hospital dispensary. As the meal progressed, I noticed small details that piqued my curiosity. Alfred's hand lingered too long on Emily's when passing a dish, a gesture she pointedly ignored. Mary's fingers tightened around her wineglass whenever John mentioned the estate's finances, and once, when Emily excused herself briefly to speak to a servant, I caught Lawrence and Cynthia exchanging a glance that seemed laden with meaning, though whether it was affection or conspiracy, I couldn't tell. The evening took a darker turn as we retired to the drawing room for coffee. The fire had died to embers, and the room felt chillier despite the summer warmth outside. Emily, seated in a backed chair, was discussing her charitable endeavors when a sharp voice cut through the conversation. It came from the hall, muffled but unmistakably angry. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was heated, almost venomous. Emily's face tightened, and she rose abruptly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but her eyes flashing. "I must attend to something." She swept out of the room, and the rest of us sat in awkward silence. John attempted to lighten the mood with a story about a local fox hunt, but the effort fell flat. Mary stared into her coffee cup, her lips pressed into a thin line. Alfred, meanwhile, excused himself with a murmured apology, claiming a headache. I caught Cynthia watching him as he left, her expression unreadable when Emily returned. Her composure was intact, but there was a new edge to her manner. "Captain Hastings," she said, turning to me, "you must forgive our little domestic dramas. Old houses have their secrets, you know." I smiled politely, but her words lingered in my mind. There was something about Styles' quarter sense of unease, of things unsaid that made me feel as though I had stumbled into a play where everyone knew their lines except me. As the evening drew to a close, Emily announced her intention to retire. "I keep a strict routine," she said, rising with a rustle of silk. "My room is locked at 10 sharp, and I expect the household to respect my privacy. Good night, all." She ascended the staircase with a regal air, and the rest of us dispersed soon after. John showed me to my room, a spacious chamber with a 4-poster bed and a view of the moonlit gardens. As I unpacked my suitcase, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The argument I'd overheard, the strained glances, the undercurrents of resentment, they all pointed to a household on the brink of something momentous. I settled into bed, the silence of the countryside broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. My mind replayed the evening's events, searching for clues to the puzzle I sensed but couldn't yet define. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt a strange certainty that Styles Court was more than a place of rest. It was a stage, and the curtain had just risen on a drama I could not yet comprehend. But for now, the house was quiet, its secrets locked behind closed doors. Emily Inglethorpe was safe in her room, the key turned in the lock. The household slept, or so I thought, and I allowed myself to believe that the morning would bring clarity. Little did I know that the events of the next few hours would shatter that illusion and draw me into the orbit of a mind far sharper than my own mind, that would soon become my guide through the labyrinth of murder and deceit. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the hours until dawn. I closed my eyes, unaware that the first act of the tragedy at Styles Court was already unfolding, silent and unseen, in the shadows of the old house. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of birdsong filtering through the open window. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace. I dressed quickly, eager to explore the estate, and perhaps glean more about its inhabitants. As I descended the staircase, I encountered Dorcas, the housemaid, polishing the banister with a vigor that suggested she was working off some private frustration. "Good morning, sir," she said, bobbing a curtsy. "Breakfast is in the morning room, if you're ready." "Thank you, Dorcas," I replied, noting the tightness in her expression. "Is Mrs. Inglethorpe about yet?" Dorcas hesitated, her cloth pausing mid-swipe. "Not yet, sir. She keeps to her room until 9, regular as clockwork. Likes her solitude." "She does," I nodded, sensing there was more she wasn't saying, but I didn't press her. The morning room was bright and airy, its windows overlooking a rose garden in full bloom. John and Mary were already seated, their conversation halting as I entered. Lawrence joined us shortly after, his nose buried in a book of poetry, and Cynthia breezed in with a cheerful greeting that seemed to lift the mood. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with only the clink of cutlery and the rustle of newspapers to break The silence. I noticed Alfred's absence and remarked on it, casually, hoping to draw out some insight. Alfred often takes his breakfast in the village, Mary said, her tone clipped. He has business there, or so he claims. John shot her a glance but said nothing, and the subject was dropped. I sensed a rift between them, one that went beyond the usual marital tensions. As we finished our meal, a commotion in the hall drew our attention. Dorcas appeared at the door, her face pale and her hands twisting in her apron. "Sir, Mr. John." "Sir," she stammered. "It's Mrs. Inglethorpe. She hasn't come down, and her door's still locked." I knocked, but there's no answer. John frowned, rising from his chair. "That's odd. She's never late. Let's go up and check." We followed him to the second floor, where a heavy oak door marked Emily's room stood ominously shut. John rapped sharply, calling her name, but there was no response. A prickle of unease ran down my spine as he tried the handle. Finding it locked, "Fetch the spare key," he ordered Dorcas, who hurried off and returned moments later with a ring of keys. John fumbled with them, his hands unsteady, until the lock clicked open. The room was dim, the curtains still drawn, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Emily Inglethorpe lay on her bed, her face contorted in a grimace of pain, her hands clutching at the bedclothes. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and her chest was still. I felt a cold dread settle over me as John knelt beside her, his voice breaking as he called her name. "She's gone," he whispered, his face ashen. "She's dead." Mary gasped, clutching the doorframe while Lawrence stood frozen, his book slipping from his hands. Cynthia let out a small cry, and Dorcas began to sob quietly. I felt a surge of helplessness, my soldier's instincts useless in the face of this sudden tragedy. "We must send for a doctor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the police, perhaps." John nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll telephone Dr. Bauerstein, he's nearby." As he left to make the call, I took a moment to survey the room. The bed was neatly made, save for the disarray caused by Emily's final moments. A coffee cup lay overturned on the nightstand, its contents staining the lace cloth. A faint scent of almonds lingered in the air, though I couldn't place its significance. The window was closed, the latch secure, and the room appeared undisturbed save for a few papers scattered near the fireplace. It was then that I thought of Hercule Poirot, the peculiar little Belgian I had met during the war, now retired and living in the village as a refugee. His reputation for solving mysteries, even in the chaos of wartime, was legendary among those who knew him. If anyone could make sense of this, it was he. I mentioned his name to John, who hesitated but agreed to send for him. "If there's foul play here," he said grimly, "we'll need more than a country doctor to sort it out." Within the hour Poirot arrived, his neat figure a stark contrast to the chaos of the household. His moustache was as impeccably groomed as ever, his eyes bright with an almost childlike curiosity. He greeted me warmly, his hand grasping mine. "With surprising strength, mon ami Hastings," he said, his accent as pronounced as I remembered. "It is a sad occasion that brings us together, but I am at your service. Tell me what has happened." I recounted the morning's events, leading him to Emily's room. He moved with a quiet precision, his eyes darting over every detail: the spilled coffee, the papers, the locked door. He knelt beside the bed, examining Emily's face with a clinical detachment that belied the sympathy in his voice. "Poison, I think," he murmured, sniffing the air. "Strychnine, perhaps. The symptoms are unmistakable. But how it was administered, and by whom, that is the question." He turned to the nightstand, lifting the coffee cup with a handkerchief and studying the stain. "This," he said, "is where we begin. The little grey cells. Hastings, they are already at work." The household gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mixture of grief and suspicion. Poirot addressed them briefly, his tone calm but authoritative. "Madame Inglethorpe has been murdered," he said, eliciting gasps from Cynthia and Dorcas. "But fear not, Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. No detail is too small, no secret too well hidden." As he spoke, I felt a spark of hope amidst the dread. The mystery of Styles Court had begun, and with Poirot at the helm, I knew we were in the hands of a master. The chapter closed with the household dispersing, each member retreating to their thoughts, while Poirot remained in the room, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup as if it held the key to the entire affair. For now the truth lay just out of reach, but I had no doubt that Poirot's relentless mind would bring it to light. Chapter 2. The midnight scream. The night at Styles Court had settled into a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if the grand old house itself sensed the undercurrents of unease rippling through its halls. Captain Arthur Hastings is still adjusting to the opulent yet strained atmosphere of the Cavendish family's estate, lay in his guest room, the soft creak of the floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl the only sounds breaking the silence. His mind, however, was far from restful. The events of the evening, the sharp words exchanged during dinner, the fleeting glances of suspicion among the family, and the peculiar coldness of Emily Inglethorpe toward her much younger husband, Alfred. At him, he had retired early, hoping sleep would quiet his restless thoughts, but the grandeur of Styles Court, with its heavy drapes and looming portraits, seemed to press against him, amplifying his sense of being an outsider in a house full of secrets. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward midnight, its rhythmic pulse a faint comfort in the darkness. Hastings had just begun to drift into an uneasy slumber when a sound shattered the quiet, a scream, sharp and piercing, that seemed to tear through the very walls of the house. It was a sound of raw terror, unmistakable in its urgency, and it jolted him upright, his heart pounding. For a moment, he sat frozen, straining to listen, half convinced he had dreamed it. But then came another sound, a thud, heavy and ominous, followed by a chorus of footsteps and muffled voices rising from the corridor beyond his door. Hastings threw off the covers and fumbled for his dressing gown, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. He stepped into the hallway, where the dim glow of a single gas lamp cast long shadows across the ornate wallpaper. The air was thick with tension, and as he moved toward the source of the commotion, he saw John Cavendish, his old friend and host, emerging from his room, his face pale and his hair disheveled. John's wife Mary was close behind, her expression a mask of controlled alarm, her silk robe hastily tied. Lawrence Cavendish, John's younger brother, appeared moments later, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear, though his usual reserved demeanor fought to conceal it. Cynthia Murdoch, Emily's young companion, stood at the far end of the hall, clutching a shawl around her shoulders, her delicate features drawn tight with shock. "What's happened?" Hastings asked, his voice hoarse as he joined the group converging on the grand staircase's mother. John said, his tone clipped, betraying a flicker of dread. That scream, it came from her room. The group hurried down the corridor, toward Emily Inglethorpe's private quarters, a heavy oak door at the end of the west wing. The door was locked, its brass handle cold and unyielding under John's grip as he rattled it frantically. "Mother, Mother, are you all right?" he called, his voice rising with urgency. There was no answer, only a chilling silence that seemed to mock their efforts. Mary stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We must get inside. She might be hurt." Lawrence, usually so quiet, spoke up, his voice shaking. "The key, she always keeps it with her. You have to break the door down." Hastings glanced around, noting the absence of Alfred Inglethorpe, Emily's husband. "Where's Alfred?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like an accusation. Mary's eyes flickered briefly toward the staircase, but she said nothing. John, ignoring the question, threw his shoulder against the door, the wood groaning but holding firm. "Help me, Hastings," he grunted, and together they rammed the door, the impact reverberating through the frame. On the third try, the lock gave way with a splintering crack, and the door swung inward, revealing a scene that froze them all in place. Emily Inglethorpe lay on her four-poster bed, her body contorted in a grotesque parody of sleep. Her face, usually so composed and authoritative, was twisted in agony, her lips drawn back in a grimace that bared her teeth. Her hands clutched at the bedclothes, fingers tangled in the fine linen, and her eyes, wide open, stared unseeing at the canopy above. The air in the room was heavy with the acrid scent of something chemical, sharp and unnatural, mingling with the faint lavender of Emily's perfume. Mary gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Cynthia let out a choked sob and turned away. Baring her face in her shawl, John staggered forward, his voice breaking as he called out, "Mother." He reached for her, but Lawrence caught his arm, pulling him back. "Don't touch her," Lawrence said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what's happened." Hastings, his military training kicking in despite the shock, scanned the room for clues. The windows were shut, their heavy curtains undisturbed. A small table beside the bed held a carafe of water, a glass, and a spilled coffee cup, its dark contents staining the polished wood. The rug beneath the bed was slightly askew, and a single candle flickered on the mantel, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Nothing seemed overtly out of place, yet the scene felt wrong, as if the room itself were holding its breath, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. "We need a doctor," Mary said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Dr. Bauerstein is nearby. Someone fetch him." "I'll go," Cynthia volunteered, her voice trembling but resolute. She hurried out, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Hastings turned to John, who stood frozen, staring at his stepmother's body. "John, we need to secure the room. If this was foul play," John snapped, his eyes blazing. "She's had a fit or a heart attack, Hastings. Don't start spinning wild theories." But Hastings wasn't so sure. The scream, the locked door, the unnatural contortion of Emily's body, it all pointed to something darker. He thought of his old friend Hercule Poirot, the retired Belgian detective who had settled in the nearby village of Styles. St. Mary Poirot, with his fastidious habits and razor-sharp mind, had a knack for seeing what others missed. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. "I'm going to fetch Poirot," Hastings said, his tone firm. "He's staying at the lodge. He'll know what to do." John frowned, his skepticism evident. "That little Belgian fellow, what's he going to do? Lecture us on mustache wax?" "Trust me," John Hastings replied, already moving toward the door. "He's more than he seems." The night air was cool and damp as Hastings hurried across the grounds to the small lodge where Poirot was staying. a temporary residence while he adjusted to life in England. The stars above were obscured by heavy clouds, and the crunch of gravel underfoot was the only sound as he approached the modest building. He knocked sharply, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the hour, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot exclaimed, his accent as pronounced as ever. "What brings you to my door at such an hour? A matter of great urgency, no doubt." Hastings quickly recounted the events: the scream, the locked room, Emily's death. Poirot's expression grew grave, his small, precise hands clasping together as he listened. "This is most serious," he said, his voice low. "A death, under such circumstances, demands investigation. Lead the way, Hastings. We must observe the scene with the utmost care." By the time they returned to Styles Court, Dr. Bauerstein had arrived, his lean frame and sharp features illuminated by the gas lamps in the hall. He was conferring with John and Mary, his manner professional but tinged with unease. Cynthia hovered nearby, her face pale, while Lawrence stood apart, his gaze fixed on the floor. Bauerstein looked up as Poirot entered, his brow furrowing. "And who is this?" he asked, his tone polite but guarded. "Hercule Poirot, at your service," Poirot said with a small bow. "A friend of Captain Hastings and, I hope, of use in this tragic matter." Bauerstein nodded curtly. "I've examined Mrs. Inglethorpe. The symptoms: convulsions, respiratory distress. The fixed pupils suggest poisoning, likely but the room was locked, and there's no sign of forced entry. It's puzzling." Poirot's eyes gleamed, and he stepped into Emily's room, his movements precise and deliberate. He circled the bed, his gaze darting from the spilled coffee cup to the rug, the windows, and the fireplace. He knelt beside the table, examining the coffee stain with a magnifying glass he produced from his pocket. "This cup," he murmured. "It is most interesting. The coffee, it was drunk, yes, but not all of it. And the stain, it is uneven, as if the cup was knocked over in haste." Hastings watched, fascinated, as Poirot's mind worked. The little Belgian moved to the fireplace, where a few ashes lay scattered. He sifted through them with a small tool, his lips pursing. "Burnt paper," he noted. "A letter, perhaps, or something more incriminating." John, growing impatient, crossed his arms. "What are you getting at, Poirot? Are you saying someone poisoned her, in a locked room?" Poirot stood, brushing his hands together. "I say nothing yet, Monsieur Cavendish, but I observe the locked door, the spilled coffee, the ashes. These are the threads of a tapestry. We must weave them together to see the picture." Mary, who had been silent, spoke up, her voice sharp. "This is absurd. Emily was not a young woman. It could have been a natural death." Poirot turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Madame, the symptoms described by Dr. Bauerstein are not those of a natural death. Strychnine is a cruel poison, deliberate in its intent. We must ask who had access to her coffee, who was in the house tonight." The question hung in the air unanswered as the family exchanged uneasy glances. Alfred Inglethorpe, who had appeared quietly during Poirot's inspection, stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I was in my study," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I heard nothing until the scream." Poirot's gaze lingered on Alfred for a moment before he turned back to the room. "We shall speak more tomorrow," he said. "For now, this room must remain untouched. Hastings, you will ensure this?" "Yes." Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of unease at the responsibility. As the family dispersed, their footsteps heavy with grief and suspicion, Poirot lingered by the bed, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "This," he said softly, almost to himself, "is where the truth begins." The household retired, but sleep was elusive. Hastings lay awake, replaying the night's events, his mind racing with questions. Who had screamed? Why was the door locked? And what was it about that coffee cup that so intrigued Poirot? The answers, he knew, lay in the Belgian's little grey cells. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Hastings felt a strange certainty that Poirot would unravel the mystery, no matter how tangled the threads. The next morning, the atmosphere at Styles Court was thick with tension. Breakfast was a somber affair, the family barely speaking as they picked at their food. Alfred, seated at the head of the table, seemed oddly detached, his eyes fixed on a newspaper. He wasn't reading. Mary kept her gaze on her plate, while John's jaw was set, his anger barely contained. Lawrence, as usual, was lost in his thoughts, his fork tracing aimless patterns on his plate. Cynthia, red-eyed from crying, excused herself early, murmuring something about needing air. Poirot joined them late, his manner brisk and purposeful. "Bon matin," he greeted, though his cheerfulness felt out of place. "We have much to do today. The police will be informed, of course, but first, I wish to speak with each of you. There are inconsistencies that must be addressed." John bristled. "Inconsistencies? You're treating us like suspects." Poirot raised a hand, his expression calm. "Monsieur, in a case such as this, everyone is a suspect until they are not. It is not personal, it is method." The morning passed in a blur of interviews, Poirot questioning each member of the household with a precision that left Hastings in awe. Dorcas, the housemaid, confirmed that Emily had taken her coffee alone in her room, as was her habit. The Butler, Manning, reported seeing Alfred leave the house late the previous evening, only to return shortly before the scream. Cynthia admitted to preparing Emily's coffee but swore she had added nothing to it. Mary's answers were clipped, her demeanor defensive, while Lawrence seemed distracted, his responses vague. By midday, Poirot had gathered enough to return to Emily's room, Hastings at his side. The detective moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every detail. He paused by the window, running a finger along the sill. Dusty murmured, "It is disturbed, but not as one would expect from an opening window. Curious." He moved to the fireplace, retrieving another fragment of burnt paper. "This," he said, holding it to the light, "is part of a receipt. For what? We shall see." Hastings watched, his curiosity piqued. "Do you think the killer burned something to cover their tracks?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, mon ami, or perhaps they wished us to think so. The mind of a criminal is a labyrinth, but it is not without its patterns." As the day wore on, Poirot's questions grew sharper, his observations more pointed. He noted the placement of a small mirror on Emily's dressing table, slightly askew, as if it had been moved. He examined the lock on the door, its mechanism, intact but showing faint scratches around the keyhole. Each detail, no matter how small, seemed to fuel his determination. By evening, the police had arrived, their presence adding a new layer of tension to the house. Inspector Japp, a gruff but competent officer, listened as Poirot outlined his findings, his skepticism giving way to grudging respect. "You've got a nose for this, Mr. Poirot," Japp said, "but a locked room in strychnine, that's a tall order, even for you." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The taller the order, the greater the satisfaction, Inspector. We shall see." As the household prepared for another sleepless night, Hastings found Poirot in the library, poring over a sketch of the room's layout. "What do you make of it all?" Hastings asked, his voice low. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "It is a puzzle, Hastings, but one with a solution. The coffee cup, the ashes, the locked door, they are pieces of a whole. Tomorrow, we shall find more. For now, we watch, we listen, and we think." The chapter closed with Poirot's words lingering in the air, a promise of answers yet to come. The household, fractured by suspicion and grief, waited in uneasy silence, while Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing down, knowing that only Poirot's brilliance could lift it. Chapter 3. The clues in the dust, the morning after Emily Inglethorpe's tragic death. Styles Court awoke to a subdued atmosphere, the air thick with grief and suspicion. Captain Arthur Hastings, still shaken by the events of the previous night, found himself unable to shake the image of Emily's contorted face, her final moments etched into his memory. The household moved with a quiet unease, as if the walls themselves held secrets waiting to be uncovered. Breakfast was a somber affair, with John Cavendish presiding over the table in a strained silence, his wife Mary picking at her food, and Lawrence, his younger brother, staring vacantly out the window. Cynthia, the young companion, excused herself early, her eyes red from crying. Only Alfred Inglethorpe, Emily's much younger husband, seemed oddly composed, though his aloof demeanor did little to ease the tension. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with an impeccable mustache and a reputation for solving the unsolvable, arrived at Styles Court shortly after breakfast. Hastings, who had known Poirot from their time in Belgium during the war, had sent for him at the earliest opportunity, convinced that only his friend's sharp mind could unravel the mystery of Emily's death. Poirot's arrival was like a spark in the gloom, his brisk energy and piercing gaze commanding attention. He greeted Hastings warmly, his eyes twinkling with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "Mon ami," Poirot said, clasping Hastings' hand, "it is a sad affair, this, but fear not, for Hercule Poirot is here, and the truth it will not hide from me. Now, tell me all, and leave nothing out." Hastings recounted the events of the previous night, the scream, the locked door, Emily's agony, and Dr. Bauerstein's grim pronouncement of poisoning. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Hastings finished, Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Bon," he said. "We begin with the scene of the crime. Take me to Madame Inglethorpe's room, if you please." The two men ascended the grand staircase of Styles Court, the polished wood creaking under their steps. The corridor leading to Emily's room was lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders. The door to Emily's bedroom, still locked as it had been the night before, was opened by John Cavendish, who had the spare key. The room itself was a study in opulence, with heavy velvet curtains, a four-poster bed draped in silk, and a mahogany dressing table cluttered with silver-backed brushes and perfume bottles. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the tragedy had left an invisible mark. Poirot stepped inside, his movements precise and deliberate. He surveyed the room with the intensity of an artist studying a canvas, his eyes darting from the bed to the windows to the fireplace. Hastings stood by the door, watching in fascination as Poirot began his work. "First, we observe," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. "The room, it tells its own story, if one knows how to listen." He began with the bed, where Emily had been found. The covers were slightly askew, a sign of her struggle in her final moments. Poirot examined the pillows, running his fingers along the seams, then turned his attention to the bedside table. A small coffee cup, its contents spilled across the polished surface, caught his eye. He leaned close, sniffing delicately, then produced a small glass vial from his pocket and carefully scraped a sample of the dried residue into it. "This coffee," he said, glancing at Hastings. "It is not innocent. I think we shall have it analyzed." Next, Poirot moved to the window, which overlooked the sprawling gardens of Styles Court. The heavy curtains were drawn back, and the window was shut tight, its latch secure. Yet, as Poirot knelt to inspect the floor beneath, he paused, his fingers brushing against the polished wood. He beckoned Hastings over. "Regard as mon ami," he said, pointing to a series of faint scratches, barely visible in the morning light. "These marks, they are recent. Something has been moved here, perhaps a ladder, or a chair. We must consider how one might enter or leave this room." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "But the window was locked, Poirot, and it's a sheer drop to the ground below. Surely no one could have climbed up." Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "Never assume, Hastings. The impossible is only what we have not yet understood. These scratches, they are a clue, and we shall follow where they lead." From the window, Poirot turned to the fireplace, where a few embers still glowed faintly. He poked through the ashes with a small metal rod he produced from his coat, his movements meticulous. After a moment, he extracted a tiny fragment of burnt paper no larger than a postage stamp. Holding it up to the light, he squinted at the faint traces of ink. "A letter, perhaps," he mused, "or a note. The words are lost, but the act of burning it this is significant. Someone wished to hide something." Hastings watched, captivated, as Poirot continued his exploration. The detective moved to the rug at the foot of the bed, lifting its corner with a gentle tug. Beneath it, half hidden in the dust, was a small brass key, its surface tarnished but intact. Poirot picked it up, turning it over in his gloved fingers. "Curio," he said softly. "A key, hidden so carefully. But to what lock does it belong? Not the door, I think, for that was opened by Monsieur Cavendish. No, this is something else." He slipped the key into his pocket, his expression unreadable. Hastings, eager to contribute, ventured a question. "Could it be to a safe or perhaps a secret drawer?" Poirot nodded approvingly. "A good thought, Hastings. We shall investigate. But first, we must speak with the family. The clues in this room, they point to a human hand, and that hand belongs to someone who walks among us." They left the bedroom, locking the door behind them, and descended to the drawing room, where the family had gathered. John Cavendish stood by the fireplace, his face pale and drawn. Mary, his wife, sat on a velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lawrence leaned against a bookcase, his eyes distant, while Alfred Inglethorpe sat apart, his calm demeanor at odds with the grief-stricken atmosphere. Cynthia, who had rejoined the group, fidgeted nervously with a handkerchief. Took center stage, his small stature somehow commanding the room. "Madame et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured. "The death of Madame Inglethorpe is no accident. It is murder, and the murderer is clever. But Hercule Poirot is more clever still. I have found clues, small things, yes, but they speak loudly. A coffee cup, a burnt paper, scratches on the floor, a hidden key. These are the threads of the truth, and I shall weave them together." A murmur ran through the room. John stepped forward, his voice tight. "Do you mean to say you already know who did this?" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Monsieur Cavendish. The little grey cells, they work, but they require time. For now I ask that you tell me of Madame Inglethorpe's will. She made changes recently." Mary nodded, her voice low. "She did. A few weeks ago she met with her lawyer. She said it was to ensure the estate was properly divided, but she wouldn't tell us more. She was secretive about it." Lawrence spoke up, his tone hesitant. "She mentioned something about protecting the family's legacy. I thought she meant John and me," but he trailed off, glancing at Alfred. Alfred's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment, before turning to Cynthia. "Mademoiselle, you were close to Madame Inglethorpe. Did she speak of her intentions?" Cynthia shook her head, her voice trembling. "She was kind to me, always, but she didn't talk about the will, only that she wanted everyone to be taken care of." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Very well. I shall need to speak with each of you privately. But first, Monsieur Hastings, you will assist me. There is someone else we must question." Leaving the family in the drawing room, and Hastings sought out Dorcas, the housemaid who had served at Styles Court for decades. They found her in the kitchen, her hands busy polishing silver, her face etched with worry. Poirot approached her with a gentle smile, his manner disarming. "Madame Dorcas," he said, "you know this house better than most. Tell me, what have you seen or heard in recent days? Even the smallest detail, it matters." Dorcas hesitated, glancing at Hastings as if seeking reassurance. "Well, sir, I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but Mr. Alfred, he's been acting strange. Late at night, I've seen him leaving the house, carrying a satchel. He'd be gone for hours, and when he came back he looked secretive, like he didn't want anyone to know." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most interesting. And these outings, they began when?" "About a month ago, Sir Dorcas replied, right around the time Mrs. Inglethorpe started talking about changing her will. Hastings felt a thrill of excitement. Poirot, do you think Alfred was planning something? Could he have Poirot cut him off with a raised hand? Speculation. Hastings is dangerous without facts. But this is a thread worth following. Merci, Madame Dorcas, you have been most helpful. As they left the kitchen, Poirot's pace quickened, his mind clearly racing. The little grey cells, they are at work. Hastings, he said, his voice vibrant with energy. The scratches, the burnt paper, the key, the coffee cup, the outings of Monsieur Alfred, these are pieces of a puzzle. And soon, very soon, the picture will be clear. They returned to the drawing room, where the family awaited, their faces a mix of hope and dread. Poirot addressed them with quiet confidence. Mes amis, the truth is near. The clues in the dust, they speak to me. The murderer believes they have covered their tracks, but they are mistaken. Hercule Poirot sees what is hidden, and the truth, it will be revealed. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Hastings felt a shiver of anticipation, knowing that Poirot's promise was no idle boast. The investigation, that had only just begun, but already, the detective's brilliance was illuminating the shadows of Styles Court. For the next several hours, Poirot continued his methodical exploration of the house, with Hastings trailing eagerly behind. They examined the servants' quarters, the library, and even the dusty attic, searching for anything that might shed light on the mystery. Poirot's attention to detail was relentless. He paused to inspect a scuff on a stair, a smudge on a window pane, a book left open on a table. Each observation, however trivial it seemed to Hastings, was catalogued in Poirot's mind, filed away for later analysis done in the library. They found a ledger detailing the estate's finances, which revealed that Emily had been meticulous in her management of the family's wealth. Yet, there were recent withdrawals, large sums that had no clear purpose. Hastings suggested they might be charitable donations, but Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings, he said. These sums, they are too irregular, too secretive. They suggest something else, perhaps a payment, or a debt. We must learn more. They interviewed the gardener, a grizzled man named Wilkins, who confirmed Dorcas's story about Alfred's late-night outings. Seen him sneaking out past the rosebeds, Wilkins said, scratching his head. Always at odd hours, like he didn't want to be seen. Carried a bag. He did, and once I thought I saw a glint of metal inside it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Metal, you say? A tool, perhaps, or something more sinister. Wilkins shrugged, uneasy. Couldn't say, sir, but it wasn't right, him creeping about like that. As the day wore on, Poirot's focus returned to the clues in Emily's room. He spent nearly an hour studying the fireplace, sifting through the ashes for additional fragments of the burnt paper. He found 2 more scraps, each bearing a single word: trust and beware. The words sent a chill down Hastings' spine, but Poirot merely nodded, as if they confirmed a suspicion. The letter. It was important, Poirot said. Someone wished to destroy it, but they were careless. These words, they point to a motive: betrayal, perhaps, or fear of discovery. By late afternoon, Poirot and Hastings retired to the study to review their findings. Poirot spread the clues before him. The vial of coffee residue, the burnt paper fragments, the mysterious key, and a sketch he had made of the scratches on the floor. He sat back in his chair, his eyes half closed, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. The little grey cells, Hastings, he said, they are working. The pieces, they begin to fit. The coffee, it is the method of the poison, I am certain. The scratches, they suggest an entry or an exit. The key, it unlocks something hidden, a secret perhaps, or a truth. And the burnt paper it speaks of, a warning that came too late. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. But who, Poirot? Who would want Emily dead? Alfred, with his sneaky outings, or someone else? Poirot smiled, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. Patience, mon ami, the truth. It is like a fine wine, it requires time to mature. But I assure you, the murderer will not escape. Hercule Poirot. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Styles Court, the household gathered for dinner. The meal was tense, with conversation stilted and eyes darting suspiciously. Poirot, seated at the table, observed each member of the family with quiet intensity, his gaze lingering on Alfred's calm facade, Mary's nervous gestures, and Lawrence's distracted air. Cynthia, still shaken, barely spoke, while John tried to maintain an air of authority, though his voice cracked with strain. After dinner, Poirot took Hastings aside, his expression serious. "Tomorrow we continue," he said. "There are more questions to ask, more secrets to uncover. But know this, Hastings, the truth is close. The clues in the dust, they lead us to the heart of this mystery." Hastings nodded, filled with admiration for his friend's unshakable confidence. As they retired for the night, the weight of the investigation settled over him, mingling with a growing sense of unease. Styles Court, with its grand halls and hidden corners, seemed to pulse with secrets, and Hastings knew that Poirot's promise of truth would come at a cost. The murderer, whoever they were, was watching, waiting, and perhaps planning their next move. The night passed uneventfully. but Hastings slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by the image of Emily's lifeless form. When morning came, he found Poirot already at work, sketching a diagram of Emily's room and murmuring to himself in French. The detective's energy was undimmed, his focus razor-sharp. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, rising from his chair. "Today, we dig deeper. The clues, they are speaking, and we must listen." They began by revisiting the scratches on the floor, which Poirot measured with a small ruler he carried in his pocket. He noted their precise alignment, suggesting that whatever had caused them had been placed deliberately. A ladder, perhaps, he mused, or a piece of furniture moved to conceal something. "We must examine the grounds below." Outside they inspected the flower beds beneath Emily's window, where the earth was soft and recently disturbed. Poirot knelt, sifting through the soil, and unearthed a small metal hook, the kind used to secure a ladder. "Voila," he said, holding it up triumphantly. "The scratches, they were made by a ladder, I am certain. Someone climbed to the window, perhaps to enter, perhaps to leave evidence." Hastings' mind raced. But who could have done it, and why? If the door was locked, why go to such lengths? Poirot's eyes twinkled. "That, Hastings, is the question. The locked door. It is a deception, meant to confuse, but Hercule Poirot is not so easily fooled." They returned to the house, where Poirot requested a meeting with the family's solicitor, Mr. Wells, who had handled Emily's will. Wells arrived within the hour, a thin, bespectacled man with a nervous air. Poirot questioned him closely about the changes to the will, learning that Emily had indeed revised it 3 weeks prior. Though Wells was reluctant to disclose details without the family's consent, she was adamant, Wells said, adjusting his glasses. She wanted to ensure certain provisions were made. But she was vague about her reasons, even with me. Poirot pressed further. "And who benefits most from this new will?" Wells hesitated, glancing at the family members gathered nearby. "That would be Mr. Alfred Inglethorpe," he said finally. The bulk of the estate was left to him, with smaller bequests to John and Lawrence Cavendish. A gasp escaped Cynthia, and John's face darkened. Mary's hands tightened in her lap, while Alfred remained impassive, his eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot noted their reactions, his expression unreadable. "Mercy, Monsieur Wells," he said. "This is most illuminating." As Wells departed, Poirot turned to the family, his voice calm but firm. "The will, it changes everything. Motive, it is the heart of murder, and now we see where the heart lies. But do not fear, Hercule Poirot will find the truth." The day continued with more interviews, each revealing new layers of tension within the household. Cynthia admitted to overhearing arguments between Emily and Alfred, though she couldn't make out the details. Lawrence, when pressed, confessed to feeling overshadowed by his stepmother's control over the estate, though he insisted he bore her no ill will. Mary, meanwhile, grew defensive when asked about her relationship with Emily, claiming only a natural strain between a wife and her mother -law. By evening, Poirot and Hastings retreated to the study once more, the weight of the day's discoveries settling over them. Poirot spread out his notes, his sketches, and the physical clues, arranging them like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. He sat back, his eyes half closed, his mind clearly at work. "The little grey cells, they are humming," he said at last. "The scratch is the key, the burnt paper, the coffee, the ladder, the will, all these things. They point to a plan, a careful plan. The murderer." They thought themselves clever, but they did not count on Hercule Poirot. Hastings leaned forward, his voice eager. "Do you know who it is, Poirot? Are you close?" Poirot smiled, a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Close, Hastings, very close. The clues in the dust, they are clear now. Tomorrow, we shall take the next step, and the truth, it will not hide for long." As they prepared to retire, the atmosphere in Styles Court remained heavy, the family's suspicions and fears palpable. Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of a revelation, one that would shake the household to its core. Poirot, however, seemed unperturbed, his confidence unshaken. The clues in the dust had spoken, and the little Belgian detective was ready to follow their lead to the truth. Chapter 4. The Poison Puzzle. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court, casting long dappled shadows across the drawing room where Hercule Poirot stood, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the sprawling grandeur of the estate. His eyes, sharp and gleaming like polished agates, darted over the assembled household, each member seated in a semicircle of unease. The air was thick with suspicion, a palpable weight that seemed to press against the ornate wallpaper and the polished mahogany furniture. Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's steadfast companion, sat to one side, his notebook open, his pen poised, though his hand trembled slightly with the gravity of the moment. Emily Inglethorpe's death had shaken the foundation of the household, and now, with Dr. Bauerstein's grim confirmation of strychnine poisoning, the spectre of murder loomed undeniable. Poirot adjusted his tie with a delicate flick of his fingers, a gesture that seemed almost frivolous given the circumstances, yet it underscored his unshakable composure. "Mes amis," he began, his voice soft but carrying the authority of a man who knew the power of his words. "We are gathered to confront a truth most unpleasant. Madame Inglethorpe was poisoned deliberately, I believe, with strychnine. Question is not only who, but how, and why. The little grey cells, they are already at work, but we must proceed with order and method. John Cavendish, his face pale and drawn, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Poisoned, but how could anyone get strychnine into her system? She was so particular about what she ate or drank. His voice carried a note of defensiveness, as if the accusation implicated the entire household, himself included. Mary Cavendish, seated beside her husband, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Her dark eyes, usually so composed, flickered with something Hastings couldn't quite place, fear perhaps, or calculation. John's right, she said, her tone measured. Emily was meticulous. She wouldn't have taken anything without knowing exactly what it was. Poirot's gaze lingered on Mary for a moment longer than necessary, his mustache twitching slightly. Meticulous, oui, but not infallible. The poison, it was administered somehow, and we must discover the vehicle. The coffee cup, found spilled near her bed, is of particular interest. Dr. Bauerstein, you have examined it, Nan. Dr. Bauerstein, a tall, angular man with a clinical demeanor, nodded from his place near the fireplace. Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, I sent the cup to a laboratory in London for analysis. The preliminary results confirm traces of strychnine in the residue. It appears she drank from it shortly before her collapse. A murmur rippled through the room. Cynthia Murdoch, the young dispenser from the local hospital, gasped softly, her hands twisting in her lap. Strychnine in the coffee, but I prepared it myself that evening. I swear there was nothing in it when I left it on the tray. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room with the gesture. Mademoiselle Cynthia, do not distress yourself. We will verify all accounts. But tell me, who else handled the tray after you've prepared it? Cynthia's brow furrowed, her eyes darting toward the floor. I left it in the kitchen. Dorcas took it up to Mrs. Inglethorpe's room. I don't know who else might have touched it. Dorcas, the elderly housemaid, stiffened in her chair, her weathered hands clutching her apron. I only did as I was told, sir, she said, her voice trembling. I took the tray straight to Mrs. Inglethorpe's door and knocked. She took it herself. I didn't linger. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the tray, it remained outside her door for how long? Not a minute, sir, Dorcas replied quickly. She opened the door right away, took the tray, and closed it again. I heard the lock turn. Hastings scribbled furiously, trying to keep up with the exchange. He glanced at Poirot, whose calm demeanor belied the intensity of his focus. The detective paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his polished shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The locked door, Poirot mused aloud. Always we return to the locked door. A room sealed, yet a crime committed. This is the puzzle we must solve. Lawrence Cavendish, John's younger brother, leaned forward, his sensitive face clouded with worry. But surely, Poirot, the poison could have been administered earlier. Strychnine doesn't act immediately, does it? Perhaps it wasn't something she ate at dinner. Dr. Bauerstein shook his head. Strychnine acts relatively quickly, Mr. Cavendish, especially in the dose that killed Mrs. Inglethorpe. The symptoms, convulsions, muscle rigidity, appeared within an hour of ingestion, based on the timeline. The coffee is the most likely source, given its proximity to her collapse. Poirot's eyes gleamed precisely. The coffee cup is our anchor, but we must not ignore other possibilities. Monsieur Alfred Inglethorpe, where were you when the coffee was served? Alfred, Emily's much younger husband, sat apart from the family, his thin frame hunched slightly in a high-backed chair. His pale face and nervous demeanor had always struck Hastings as out of place in the robust Cavendish clan. I was in my study, Alfred said, his voice low. I didn't join the family for coffee that evening. I had business to attend to. Business, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but probing. At such a late hour, most curious. And what business was this, monsieur? Alfred's eyes flickered toward the floor. Correspondence, nothing of importance. Hastings noted the hesitation in Alfred's voice, the way his fingers twitched against the armrest. He leaned toward Poirot and whispered, he's hiding something, don't you think? Poirot's only response was a slight tilt of his head, his attention fixed on Alfred. We will return to this correspondence later, he said, then turned to the group. For now we must explore the source of the strychnine. Mademoiselle Cynthia, you work at the hospital dispensary. You have access to such substances. Cynthia's cheeks flushed, and she straightened in her chair. Yes, I do, but I would never. The strychnine at the hospital is strictly accounted for. Every dose is recorded, and I haven't dispensed any in months. And yet, Poirot said, producing a folded piece of paper from his pocket with a flourish. This receipt, found in Monsieur Alfred's study, indicates the purchase of strychnine from a pharmacy in Tadminster only 2 days ago. Can you explain this, Monsieur Inglethorpe? The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like a storm cloud. Alfred's face drained of color, his lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. John leapt to his feet, his voice sharp. Alfred, what the devil is this? You bought strychnine. I didn't. Alfred stammered, his hands rising. Defensively, I've never seen that receipt before. Someone must have planted it. Mary's hand tightened on John's arm, pulling him back to his seat. "John, please, let Monsieur Poirot handle this. There must be an explanation." Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a faint smile that held no warmth. "An explanation, Madame Cavendish, is precisely what I seek. But let us not rush to judgment. The receipt is a clue, but not the solution. We must consider all possibilities." Hastings, unable to contain himself, leaned forward. "But Poirot, if the strychnine came from the pharmacy, and Alfred's name is on the receipt, doesn't that make him the prime suspect?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Mon ami, you are eager, but you leap too quickly. A receipt is not a confession. It is a thread, and we must follow it carefully. Now, let us turn to the evening of the murder. One propose a reenactment, to retrace the steps of that fateful night. Each of you will play your part, exactly as it occurred." A collective murmur of unease passed through the room, but no one dared object. Poirot's authority, though quiet, was absolute. He clapped his hands sharply. "Bon. We begin in the kitchen, where Mademoiselle Cynthia prepared the coffee. Then we follow the tray's journey to Madame Inglethorpe's room. Every detail matters. Let us proceed." The kitchen at Styles Court was a cavernous space, its stone walls and heavy oak table a relic of the estate's older days. The modern additions, a gas stove, gleaming copper pot, seemed almost out of place. Cynthia stood at the counter, her hands moving mechanically as she prepared a fresh pot of coffee under Poirot's watchful eye. The household gathered around, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dread. "I ground the beans here," Cynthia said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she mimed the actions. "Then I poured the coffee into the pot and set it on the tray with the cup and saucer." Sugar and cream were already on the tray, as Mrs. Inglethorpe liked both. Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the counter. "And who was in the kitchen with you?" Mademoiselle Cynthia hesitated. "Dorcas was there, tidying up, and I think Mary came in briefly to ask about the dinner menu for the next day." Mary's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, I was here for a moment. I didn't touch the tray, though." Poirot's gaze lingered on Mary, then shifted to Dorcas. "And you, Dorcas, you took the tray directly to Madame Inglethorpe?" "Yes, sir," Dorcas said, her voice firm despite her age. "I carried it straight upstairs, knocked on her door, and she took it from me. I didn't see anyone else in the hall." Poirot paced slowly around the kitchen, his fingers brushing against the edge of the counter. "And the tray was not left unattended at any point?" Cynthia shook her head. "Not while I was here. I set it down for a moment to fetch the sugar, but I was only a few steps away." "Steps away," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. "A moment is all it takes, mademoiselle. A moment for a hand to slip something into the coffee, unseen." Cynthia's face paled, and she clutched the edge of the counter for support. "You can't think I had anything to do with it. I cared for Mrs. Inglethorpe. She was kind to me." Poirot raised a hand, his expression softening. "I accuse no one, mademoiselle. I seek only the truth. Now, let us move to the upstairs hall. Dorcas, lead the way." The group ascended the grand staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The hall outside Emily's room was wide, lined with portraits of stern-faced Cavendish ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow the procession. Dorcas stopped at the heavy oak door, now sealed with a police lock, and mimed knocking. "This is where I stood," she said. "Mrs. Ingle." They opened the door, took the tray, and closed it again. "I heard the lock turned." Poirot examined the door, running his fingers along the frame. "The lock, it is sturdy. And yet, the poison found its way inside. Let us enter the room as if we were Madame Inglethorpe," the police had allowed. Poirot access, and he produced a key, unlocking the door with a soft click. The room was, as it had been the night of the murder, opulent, with a four-poster bed draped in crimson, a mahogany dressing table, and a small writing desk. The spilled coffee cup, now in police custody, had left a faint stain on the rug near the bed. Poirot knelt beside it, his eyes narrowing. "The cup fell here," he said, pointing to the stain. "But why? Was it knocked over in her convulsions, or did she drop it deliberately as a sign?" "The coffee was not finished," Dr. Bauerstein said. "A few sips, perhaps, but enough to deliver the fatal dose." Hastings, standing near the window, peered out at the gardens below. "Could someone have entered through here, Poirot?" "The window was locked, but maybe it was tampered with." Poirot joined him, examining the window's latch. "A possibility, mon ami, but unlikely. The window is high, and the grounds below show no signs of disturbance. No, I believe the poison entered with the coffee, through the door, in plain sight." John Cavendish, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice tight. "But if the tray wasn't left unattended, how could anyone have poisoned the coffee without being seen? It doesn't make sense." Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming. "It makes perfect sense, monsieur, if we consider that the poison was not added to the coffee in the kitchen, but later, in this very room. The tray was taken by Madame Inglethorpe herself. What if the poison was already in the cup, or in the sugar, or the cream, waiting for her?" A gasp escaped Cynthia. "But I checked everything. The sugar and cream were from the pantry, sealed, but not impervious," Poirot said. "We must examine every item on that tray." Dr. Bauerstein Have the sugar and cream been tested? Not yet, Bauerstein admitted. The focus was on the coffee itself, as it showed the most obvious traces. But I can arrange for further tests. Do so, Poirot said, his tone firm. And now let us continue the reenactment. Madame Inglethorpe takes the tray, locks herself in, and drinks the coffee. What happens next? The group stood in awkward silence, the weight of the imagined scene pressing in. Poirot moved to the bed, sitting on its edge as if he were Emily. She drinks perhaps a sip or two, and then the convulsions begin. She screams, the cup falls, and the household rushes to her aid, but it is too late. Mary's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It's horrible to think about, she said softly. She must have suffered terribly. Poirot's eyes softened for a moment. We, Madame, cruel death, and one that demands justice. But we are close, I assure you. The clues, they are aligning. The reenactment continued, with each member recounting their actions after the scream. John described breaking down the door with Lawrence, only to find Emily in her final moments. Cynthia wept softly, recounting her futile attempts to help. Alfred, still pale, claimed he was in his study until the commotion drew him out. Poirot listened intently, his questions sharp but never accusatory, probing for inconsistencies. As the reenactment concluded, Poirot gathered the group in the drawing room once more. The tension was palpable, each member eyeing the others with suspicion. Hastings' notebook filled with scribbled observations felt a thrill of anticipation. Poirot was building toward something. He could sense it, a breakthrough that would crack the case wide open. Mes amis, Poirot said, his voice rising slightly. The reenactment has revealed much. The coffee, the tray, the locked room, they tell a story, but not the whole story. There is a detail, a small thing, that we have overlooked. Tomorrow, I will pursue this detail, and I promise you it will lead us closer to the truth. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. But beware, the murderer is among us, and they are watching. They believe they have outwitted Hercule Poirot, but they are mistaken. The little grey cells, they do not rest. The household dispersed, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. Hastings followed Poirot to the garden, where the detective lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence, and exhaled a plume of smoke into the evening air. What did you find, Poirot? Hastings asked, unable to contain his curiosity. What's this detail we've overlooked? Poirot smiled, his eyes glinting in the fading light. Patience, mon ami. The detail is small, but it is everything. Tomorrow, we will turn the puzzle upside down, and the truth will fall into place. Hastings felt a surge of admiration for his friend, whose confidence seemed unshakable. But as they walked back to the house, the shadows lengthening across the lawn, he couldn't shake the feeling that the murderer was indeed watching, waiting for Poirot to make a mistake. The game was far from over, and the poison puzzle was only the beginning. The next morning, Poirot was up early, his energy undiminished by the late night. Hastings found him in the dining room, surrounded by papers and a tray of breakfast untouched save for a single cup of black coffee. You're up early, Hastings remarked, taking a seat. Did you sleep at all? Sleep, mon ami, is for those without mysteries to solve, Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. The little grey cells, they do not rest when a crime is afoot. I have been reviewing the timeline, the statements, the clues, and I have a theory. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. A theory about the poison precisement, Poirot said, tapping a finger against his temple. The strychnine, it is a poison most particular. It acts quickly, yes, but it requires a precise dose to kill so swiftly. Too little, and the victim survives. Too much, and the symptoms are immediate. The coffee cup, it contained just enough to ensure death within the hour. This suggests planning, calculation, a mind not only malicious but meticulous. But who? Hastings pressed. Alfred with a receipt, or Cynthia, with her access to the hospital dispensary? Poirot shook his head. You think in straight lines, Hastings. The truth, it is more circuitous. The receipt in Alfred's study. It is too convenient, Nan, a clue place to be found. And Mademoiselle Cynthia, her distress is genuine, I believe. No, we must look deeper, to the motives and the opportunities. Before Hastings could respond, Dorcas entered, her face flushed with excitement. Monsieur Poirot, sir, there's something you should see. I was cleaning out the fireplace in Mrs. Inglethorpe's room, as you asked, and I found this. She held out a small, charred scrap of paper, no larger than a postage stamp. Poirot took it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he examined the faint writing. Most interesting, he murmured. A fragment, but a significant one. The word dosage, do you see it, Hastings? And here, a number, 0.1. This is no coincidence. Hastings peered over his shoulder, squinting at the tiny script. Dosage, you think it's related to the strychnine? I am certain of it, Poirot said, slipping the fragment into an envelope. This paper, it was burned to conceal its contents, but the fire was not thorough. The murderer made a mistake, and that mistake will lead us to them. The day unfolded with a flurry of activity. Poirot dispatched Dr. Bauerstein to expedite the analysis of the sugar and cream from the tray, while he and Hastings visited the Tadminster pharmacy to investigate the strychnine receipt. The pharmacist, a nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses, confirmed that the receipt was genuine, but the signature Alfred Inglethorpe's was not one he recognized. It was a woman who collected it, he said, glancing at his ledger. She said she was acting on Mr. Inglethorpe's behalf. I didn't think to question it. A woman. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Describe her, if you please. The pharmacist hesitated. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed. She wore a veil, so I couldn't see her face clearly, but she was polite, paid in cash, and left quickly. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. A veil, he said softly. Most convenient for concealing one's identity in the strychnine. It was in powder form. Yes, the pharmacist said. A small vial, enough for a single dose, she said, for medical purposes. Back at Styles Court, Poirot gathered the household once more, this time in the library, where the shelves of leather-bound books seemed to close in around them. The air was thick with anticipation, each member waiting for Poirot's next move. He stood at the center of the room, the charred paper fragment in his hand. Miss Amos, he began, we have made progress. The strychnine, it was purchased under Monsieur Alfred's name, but by a woman unknown. The coffee cup contained the poison, but the sugar and cream they, too, must be considered. And this, he held up the fragment. This speaks of a dosage, a precise measurement. The murderer, they did not act on impulse. They planned, they calculated, and they made a mistake. Mary Cavendish stood abruptly, her face pale. This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. You're suggesting one of us went to such lengths. Why would we? Emily was family. Family, Poirot said, his voice soft but cutting, is often the source of the deepest betrayals. Money, jealousy, resentment, these are motives as old as time. Madame Inglethorpe's fortune, it was considerable. Nan, and her will, it was recently changed. Who stood to gain the most? John's face reddened. You're pointing fingers without proof, Poirot. Alfred's the one with the receipt in his study. If anyone's to blame, it's him. Alfred shot to his feet, his voice shrill. I've told you, I didn't buy it. Someone's trying to frame me. Enough. Poirot's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the room. Accusations without evidence are useless. I deal in facts, and the facts are these. The poison was administered in this house by someone who knew Madame Inglethorpe's habits, her trust in her coffee. The reenactment has shown us the path of the tray, but it has also shown us something else. A moment, a fleeting opportunity, when the poison could have been added. He turned to Cynthia. Mademoiselle, you said you stepped away from the tray to fetch the sugar. How long were you gone? Cynthia's eyes widened. Only a moment, perhaps 30 seconds. The pantry is just off the kitchen. 30 seconds, Poirot repeated. Enough time for a skilled hand to act. And Madame Cavendish, you were in the kitchen at that moment. Mary's lips tightened. I told you, I didn't touch the tray. I was only there to speak to Dorcas. And yet, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the tray was left unattended, if only for a moment. A moment is all it takes. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Hastings felt a chill, the realization that the murderer was indeed among them. Their identity tantalizingly close, yet still obscured. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the promise of revelation, and as the household dispersed, he leaned toward Hastings. His voice low. Tomorrow, mon ami, we will set a trap. The murderer, they are clever, but not as clever as Hercule Poirot. The poison puzzle is nearly solved. Hastings nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. The game was afoot, and what's closing in? Chapter 5. The hidden letter. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court, casting long slanting beams across the polished wooden floors. Captain Arthur Hastings, still adjusting to the somber atmosphere that had settled over the household since Emily Inglethorpe's death, sat in the drawing room, his notebook open before him. The events of the previous days, Emily's agonizing death, the suspicion of strychnine poisoning, and Hercule Poirot's meticulous investigation had left him restless. His old friend, the retired Belgian detective, had a way of transforming chaos into order, and Hastings was eager to see what new revelations the day would bring. Poirot, as was his custom, entered the room with an air of quiet confidence, his small frame immaculate in a neatly pressed suit, his mustache perfectly waxed. His eyes, sharp and inquisitive, scanned the room as if it might yield secrets to him alone. Mon ami, he said, addressing Hastings with a slight nod, today we advance. The little grey cells, they are humming. Yes, we shall uncover something of great importance. Hastings closed his notebook, his curiosity piqued. You found something new, Poirot, from the reenactment last night. The reenactment of the evening's events, orchestrated by Poirot, had been a peculiar affair. With the household retracing their steps leading up to Emily's death, it had felt theatrical, almost absurd, to recreate the mundane moments of dinner and conversation. Yet Poirot had insisted every detail mattered. Not found, Hastings, but seen, Poirot corrected, tapping his temple lightly. The eyes, they observe, and the mind, it connects. During our little exercise, I noticed a vassonet, yes, but out of place. It was moved, ever so slightly, from its usual position, and where there is movement, there is purpose. Hastings frowned, trying to recall the vase in question. The drawing room was filled with such objects: porcelain vases, silver candelabras, and delicate figurines, all testaments to Emily Inglethorpe's wealth and taste. A vase? You think someone hid something in it? Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Precisely, mon ami. Come, let us investigate. The two men moved to the drawing room's far corner, where a tall, intricately painted vase stood. On a mahogany sideboard, it was Chinese, Hastings noted, its surface adorned with swirling dragons and delicate blossoms. Poirot, with a care that bordered on reverence, lifted the vase and peered inside. His fingers, nimble and precise, reached in and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper, folded tightly as if to conceal its contents. A letter, Poirot announced, his voice tinged with triumph. He smoothed it out on the sideboard, revealing a single sheet of Emily Inglethorpe's personal stationery, her monogram embossed at the top. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, though the ink was smudged in places, as if written in haste. Hastings leaned over Poirot's shoulder, reading aloud. To Mr. Wells, my solicitor, you must know that I have been betrayed. I cannot say more now, but I fear for my safety. The changes I spoke of must be made at once. I trust no one. The letter cut off abruptly, the final words trailing into a jagged scrawl, as if Emily had been interrupted. Betrayed, Hastings repeated, his voice low. By whom? And what changes? This could be the key to everything, Poirot. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Indeed, Hastings, this letter, it is a cry from the grave. Madame Inglethorpe knew something dangerous. But why hide it in a vase, and why not finish it? These are questions we must answer. The discovery of the letter sent a ripple of excitement through Hastings, though he couldn't shake a sense of unease. The idea that Emily had sensed betrayal, perhaps even her own impending death, cast a darker shadow over the already troubled household. Should we show this to the family? He asked. Poirot shook his head. Not yet, mon ami. The letter is vague, and to reveal it now would only stir the hornet's nest. We must proceed with care, like the spider weaving its web. First we question those who were closest to Madame Inglethorpe. There is much they are not telling us. The morning passed in a flurry of interviews, with Poirot moving through the household like a conductor directing an orchestra. He began with Dorcas, the housemaid, whose loyalty to Emily had been evident in her tearful recounting of the night of the murder. Seated in the servants' quarters, her hands folded tightly in her lap, Dorcas answered Poirot's questions with a mixture of deference and caution. Did Madame Inglethorpe ever speak of this letter, Dorcas? Poirot asked, holding the crumpled paper just out of her sight, or of any fears for her safety. Dorcas shook her head, her eyes wide. No, sir, not to me. But she was troubled these last weeks, that I can say. She'd sit alone in her room, writing letters, burning papers in the fireplace. I thought it was just her way, being particular. But now, her voice faltered. I wish I'd asked her what was wrong. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the vase in the drawing room, did you ever see anyone tampering with it? Dorcas hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. Well, sir, I don't like to speak out of turn, but Mr. Lawrence, he was in the drawing room late one night, a few days before it happened. I saw him moving things about, like he was looking for something. I didn't think much of it at the time. Lawrence, Poirot murmured, exchanging a glance with Hastings. Mercy, Dorcas, you have been most helpful. As they left the servants' quarters, Hastings couldn't contain his curiosity. Lawrence, do you think he was looking for this letter? He's been acting strangely, always scribbling in that notebook of his. Do you suppose he's hiding something? Poirot raised a hand, urging patience. All in good time, Hastings. Lawrence Cavendish is a man of secrets. Yes, but whether they are connected to this letter, we shall see. For now, we turn our attention to the grounds. There is talk of a stranger seen near Styles Court, and I wish to know more. The two men ventured outside, where the late summer air was warm and heavy with the scent of roses. The gardens of Styles Court were meticulously tended, with neatly trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds. But Poirot's interest lay beyond the manicured lawns. He led Hastings to the edge of the estate, where a gravel path wound toward a small gate leading to the village road. There they found the gardener, a grizzled man named Manning, who was pruning a row of shrubs. His weathered face broke into a smile at their approach, though his eyes held a flicker of wariness. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, setting down his shears. "What brings you out here?" Poirot wasted no time. "Monsieur Manning, we've worked at Styles Court for many years." "Yes." "Tell me, have you noticed any unusual visitors in the days before Madame Inglethorpe's death?" Manning scratched his chin, his gaze drifting toward the gate. "Well, sir, there was one fellow, about a week ago. Tall, thin chap, with a beard and a limp. Didn't look like he belonged round here. He was standing by the gate, just watching the house. I asked him his business, but he said he was only passing through. Didn't like the look of him, though." "A stranger," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. "And did you see him again?" "No, sir, just the once. But I told Mrs. Inglethorpe about Dorcas about it, and she seemed right upset. Said she didn't know the man and didn't want strangers poking about." Hastings felt a surge of excitement. "A stranger with a limp, that's Knew Poirot. Could he be involved? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Perhaps, perhaps not. We must find this man and learn his purpose. But first let us return to the letter. Its fragments, they speak to me. Back in the library, Poirot spread the letter's pieces on a table, arranging them like a puzzle. The paper was torn in places, but most of the text was legible. He studied it in silence, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Hastings watched, fascinated by the intensity of his focus. The betrayal, Poirot said at last. It is personal. Madame Inglethorpe writes of someone close, someone she trusted. This is not the work of a stranger, Hastings, but of someone within these walls. Hastings felt a chill. You mean one of the family? Or someone like Cynthia, or even Evelyn Howard? Poirot's lips twitched. All are possible, mon ami. But we must consider motive. Who stood to gain from Madame Ingle's death, and who had the opportunity to hide this letter? The rest of the day was spent in quiet observation. Poirot moved through the house with a predator's grace, his eyes darting to every detail: the placement of a chair, the angle of a mirror, the dust on a windowsill. Hastings, though eager to assist, found himself struggling to keep up with Poirot's rapid deductions. At dinner, the atmosphere was tense. John Cavendish, usually jovial, was curt, his eyes avoiding his wife Mary's. Lawrence, pale and distracted, barely touched his food, his fingers fidgeting with a pen. Cynthia, normally bright and talkative, was subdued, her gaze fixed on her plate. Alfred Inglethorpe, however, seemed oddly composed, his smile almost smugged as he engaged in polite conversation. After dinner, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Observe, mon ami," he whispered. "The letter has changed everything. They know we are close to the truth, and their masks are slipping." That night, Hastings lay awake, the letter's words echoing in his mind. Betrayal. I trust no one. Who had Emily feared? And why had the letter been hidden in such an odd place? As sleep finally claimed him, he dreamed of vases and shadows, of locked doors and poisoned cups, and of Poirot's gleaming eyes, promising answers. The following morning, Poirot was already at work, sketching a timeline of the night of Emily's death. He marked each family member's movements, cross-referencing them with Dorcas's and Manning's accounts. The letter was hidden after the murder, he declared. Someone wished to keep it from us, but they were careless. The vase was not their usual hiding place. There was a moment of panic. Hastings nodded, his mind racing. So the killer was in the drawing room that night, after Emily died. Exactement, Poirot said. And they knew the letter was dangerous. We must now find this stranger, the man with the limp. He may be a witness or something more. Their search for the stranger led them to the village, where inquiries at the local inn revealed his name, Evelyn Howard, Emily's former companion. Poirot arranged to meet her at a nearby cafe, and Hastings could sense the detective's anticipation. Evelyn, a tall woman with a stern face and a noticeable limp from an old injury, greeted them with thinly veiled hostility. "I've no love for Alfred Inglethorpe," she said, her voice sharp. "He's a leech, always was. But I didn't kill Emily. I was in London that night, and I've got witnesses to prove it." Poirot listened, his expression neutral. "And yet you were seen at Styles Court, Madame Howard." "Why Evelyn's?" Jaw tightened. "I wanted to warn Emily about Alfred. I'd heard he was after her money, changing her will, but she wouldn't listen. We quarreled, and I left. That's all." Her alibi checked out, confirmed by a London hotel's records. But Poirot remained unsatisfied. "She knows more than she says," he told Hastings later. "But she is not our killer." The letter points inward, to the heart of the family. Back at Styles Court, Poirot turned his attention to Mary Cavendish. In a private conversation, she admitted to marital strain with John, driven by financial dependence on Emily's wealth. "We were desperate," she said, her voice breaking, "but I'd never hurt her. She was like a mother to me." Poirot's questions grew sharper, probing Mary's whereabouts the night of the murder. Her answers were vague, her eyes avoiding his. Hastings watched, his heart sinking. Could Mary, so poised and kind, be involved? The day ended with Poirot in the library reconstructing the letter's fragments. He had pieced together nearly all of it, revealing a second page that mentioned a plan and a deception. The words were cryptic, but Poirot's confidence was unshaken. "The motive, Hastings," he said. "It is clear now: greed, jealousy, or perhaps both. Tomorrow we press harder." As night fell, Styles Court seemed to hold its breath, the weight of secrets pressing against its walls. Hastings, lying in bed, felt the mystery closing in. The letter's words, a haunting refrain. Poirot, he knew, was close to the truth, and the household would never be the same. Chapter 6. The Stranger's Shadow. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court, casting long dappled shadows across the oak-panelled dining room. Captain Arthur Hastings, still adjusting to the unsettling events of the past days, sat at the polished mahogany table, his coffee cooling untouched. The household was subdued, the weight of Emily Inglethorpe's death pressing on every occupant. Hercule Poirot, however, was already in motion, his small, precise steps echoing as he paced near the fireplace, his eyes darting with the intensity of a man who saw not just the room but the unseen threads of motive and opportunity weaving through it. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning to Hastings with a slight tilt of his head, "we must pursue this shadow, this stranger who has flitted across the stage of styles, a figure seen yet not known," said intrigant. "None." Hastings nodded, though his mind was still tangled in the clues of the previous days. The burnt paper, the hidden key, the strychnine receipt. "You mean the stranger the gardener mentioned? Do you think they're connected to the murder?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings had come to recognize as the prelude to a revelation. "Everything, Hastings, is connected. The smallest pebble ripples the pond. This stranger, this Evelyn Howard, she is no mere ghost. She is a woman of flesh and blood, with reasons to resent, perhaps to act. We shall find her." The name Evelyn Howard had surfaced a previous evening when Poirot questioned the groundskeeper, a wiry man named Tompkins who tended the estate's sprawling gardens. Tompkins had recounted seeing a woman sharp-faced like a hawk lurking near the rose trellis days before Emily's death. When pressed, he identified her as Miss Howard, Emily's former companion, who had left Styles in a storm of bitterness after a falling out over Alfred Ingle. The mention of Alfred, Emily's younger husband, had deepened the suspicion swirling around him, but Poirot's interest in Evelyn suggested the detective saw a broader web. Hastings pushed his coffee aside. "How do we find her? She could be anywhere by now." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The world, mon ami, is not so large when one knows where to look. Evelyn Howard is no fugitive hiding in the wilderness. She is a creature of habit, of pride. She will be near nursing her grievances. We shall inquire in the village, at the post office, in places where tongues wag." By mid-morning, Poirot and Hastings set out for the village of Styles St. Mary, a quaint cluster of stone cottages and narrow lanes nestled a mile from the estate. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and early autumn leaves. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a dark suit and polished shoes, seemed out of place against the rustic backdrop, yet his confidence was unshaken. Hastings, in his tweed jacket, felt more at ease, though his limp, a lingering reminder of his war injuries, slowed their pace. Their first stop was the village post office, a cramped room smelling of ink and old paper. The postmistress, Mrs. Greeley, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip, leaned over the counter as Poirot inquired about Evelyn Howard. "Miss Howard? Oh, she's been about," Mrs. Greeley said, her eyes narrowing with delight at sharing news. "Stayed at the Red Lion Inn a week ago, she did. Looked sour as ever, muttering about that man, Alfred Inglethorpe, I reckon. Paid for her letters to be held here, but she hasn't come back since." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the counter. "And these letters, madame, did you notice their postmarks?" Mrs. Greeley hesitated, then lowered her voice. "One was from London, another from Tadminster. She didn't want anyone knowing her business, but I saw her scribbling a note to someone at the chemist shop there." "Tadminster," Poirot repeated, his voice soft but sharp. "Merci, madame, you have been most helpful." As they stepped into the street, Hastings glanced at Poirot. "A chemist? Could she be linked to the strychnine?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his gaze distant. "But we must not leap, Hastings. The mind, it constructs a bridge before the path is clear. First, we visit the Red Lion." The Red Lion Inn was a half-timbered building at the village's edge, its sign creaking in the breeze. The innkeeper, a ruddy-faced man named Mr. Wells, confirmed Evelyn's stay. "Kept to herself, mostly," he said, wiping a glass. "Paid for a week up front, then left sudden like 2 days ago. Said something about settling old scores." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did she receive visitors? Or mention where she was going?" "No visitors," Mr. Wells replied. "But she asked for directions to the old mill on the edge of Tadminster. Odd place for a lady like her." The old mill, Poirot explained as they left the inn, was a derelict structure on the outskirts of the neighboring town, a place where locals rarely ventured. "If Evelyn Howard is there, Hastings, she is not hiding for comfort. She is plotting, or perhaps licking her wounds. We shall see." The journey to Tadminster took them through rolling fields, the hedgerows ablaze with late blackberries. Poirot was silent for much of the walk, his mind clearly turning over the puzzle. Hastings, however, couldn't resist speculating. What if Evelyn poisoned Emily out of spite? She hated Alfred, and maybe she saw Emily's marriage as a betrayal. Poirot shook his head. Motive, yes. Opportunity, perhaps. But method, that is the question. The locked room, the strychnine, and the coffee of Evelyn Howard was not in the house that night. We must confirm her movements. The old mill loomed into view as they crested a hill, its sagging roof and broken windows stark against the grey sky. The air carried a faint smell of mildew and decay. As they approached, Poirot held up a hand, signaling caution. "Listen, Hastings. The silence here is not natural." They crept closer, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. The mill's door hung ajar, and inside, shadows danced across dust-covered machinery. Poirot's eyes scanned the floor, noting fresh footprints in the dirt. "Someone has been here recently," he whispered. A rustling from the upper level made Hastings tense, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer carried. Poirot, undaunted, climbed the creaking stairs, his movements deliberate. At the top, in a corner strewn with old sacks, sat Evelyn Howard, She was a tall, angular woman in her late 40s, her face lined with bitterness, her dark eyes flashing as she saw them. "What do you want?" she snapped, rising to her feet. "This is no place for strangers." Poirot bowed slightly, his tone polite but firm. "Mademoiselle Howard, I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings. We seek the truth about Emily Inglethorpe's death. You, I believe, have knowledge of it." Evelyn's laugh was harsh, like breaking glass with truth. "That woman brought her fate on herself, marrying that snake Alfred. I warned her, but she wouldn't listen. Now she's gone, and good riddance." Hastings bristled, but Poirot remained calm. "You left Styles after a quarrel, did you not? Over Monsieur Alfred?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He's a leech, a fortune hunter. I told Emily he'd ruin her, but she was blind. Said I was jealous, cast me out like a servant. Me, who'd been with her for years. And yet," Poirot said, stepping closer, "you remained near Styles. Watching, perhaps. Planning." Her eyes darted to the side, a flicker of unease. "I had business in Tadminster. Nothing to do with her. Business with a chemist, perhaps." Poirot pressed, his voice soft but relentless. "Strychnine is a dangerous substance, mademoiselle. A chemist might remember selling it." Evelyn's face paled, but she held her ground. "I'm no poisoner. If you want the killer, look to Alfred. He's the one who stood to gain." Poirot nodded, as if considering her words. "Your alibi. For the night of the murder, mademoiselle, it is solid. I was in Tadminster at the chemist's lodging-house," she said quickly. "Ask Mrs. Pembry, the landlady. She'll tell you." "We shall," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "And this mill, what brings you here?" Evelyn hesitated, then gestured to a small satchel in the corner. "I needed a place to think, to write. I'm no criminal, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you think." Poirot's gaze lingered on the satchel, but he did not press further. "Merci, mademoiselle. We will speak again." As they left the mill, Hastings felt a mix of frustration and intrigue. "She's hiding something, Poirot. That bit, motive enough," perhaps Poirot said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "But her alibi, if true, clears her of the act itself. We must verify it, and we must return to Styles, for there is another thread to unravel." Back at Styles Court, the atmosphere was no lighter. John Cavendish paced to the drawing room, his face drawn with worry. Mary, his wife, sat by the window, her expression distant. Lawrence, the younger brother, scribbled in a notebook, his pen scratching furiously. Cynthia, the young companion, was absent, attending to her duties at the hospital. Poirot wasted no time. "Madame Cavendish," he said, addressing Mary, "a word, if you please. You have been most silent about the night of Emily's death. Where were you when the scream was heard?" Mary's eyes flicked to her husband, then back to Poirot. "I was in my room, preparing for bed. I heard the scream and came at once, and before that." Poirot's tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "I was walking in the garden," she said, her voice steady. "I needed air." The house felt oppressive. Hastings caught the slight tremor in her words, but Poirot merely nodded. "And you, Monsieur John, your wife's walks, they are frequent?" John stopped pacing, his face reddening. "What are you implying, Poirot? Mary's free to do as she pleases." "Of course," Poirot said smoothly, "but the estate, it is large, and money, it weighs heavily. Madame Inglethorpe's fortune, did it not cause tension between you and your wife?" Mary rose, her hands clenched. "That's enough, Monsieur Poirot. My marriage is no concern of yours." Poirot bowed. "Pardon, madame, but the truth, it concerns us all." As Mary stormed out, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "You're pushing hard, my friend. Do you think she's involved?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The heart, Hastings, it betrays much. Madame Cavendish hides her pain, but it is there. And pain, it can lead to desperate acts." Their next stop was Cynthia's room, where Poirot's sharp eyes caught a small vial tucked behind a stack, with medical books. He held it to the light, revealing a fine white powder inside. "Sleeping powder, perhaps," he murmured, "or something more sinister." Cynthia, returning from the hospital, froze in the doorway. "What are you doing in my room?" Poirot turned, the vial in hand. "Mademoiselle, this powder, what is it?" Her face flushed. "It's a sedative, for patients. I keep it for emergencies." "Surely you don't think I think only of the truth," Poirot said. "And the truth, it is close." That evening Poirot gathered his notes in the library, sketching a timeline of the fatal night. Hastings watched, fascinated, as the detective's pencil moved with precision, marking each event: Emily's argument, her retirement to her room, the scream, the locked door. Beside it, he listed the suspects: Alfred, Mary, John, Lawrence, Cynthia, and now Evelyn Howard. "The method, Hastings," Poirot said, tapping the paper. "It is nearly clear. The poison was in the coffee. Yes, but how it was delivered, and by whom, that is the key. We are close, mon ami, very close." The chapter stretched on as Poirot and Hastings pursued further leads, their investigation weaving through the village and back to Styles. They confirmed Evelyn's alibi with Mrs. Pembry, who swore Evelyn was in Tadminster the night of the murder, drinking tea until midnight. Yet Poirot remained unsatisfied, his mind circling the vial in Cynthia's room. Mary's evasive demeanor, and the lingering question of the stranger's role. As night fell, Poirot stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit gardens. "The shadow moves, Hastings," he said softly, "but we shall catch it. Tomorrow we tighten the net." The household retired, each member carrying their secrets, while Poirot's mind churned, his little grey cells piecing together the puzzle. The truth he knew was within reach, and the stranger's shadow would soon be unmasked. Chapter 7. The locked room. Riddle. The morning sun cast a pale, golden glow through the tall windows of Styles Court, illuminating the somber gathering in Emily Inglethorpe's bedroom. The room, with its heavy oak furniture and faded tapestries, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding the secrets of that fatal night. I stood near the door, my notebook clutched tightly, watching Hercule Poirot pace with measured steps, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that signaled his little grey cells were at work. The locked door, the undisturbed room, the strychnine-laced coffee cup. It was a puzzle that seemed impenetrable, yet Poirot's confidence was unshaken. "Mon ami," he said, turning to me with a slight tilt of his head. "The room, it speaks to us, does it not? Every scratch, every shadow, holds a whisper of truth. We must only listen." I nodded, though my mind swirled with questions. The key found beneath the rug, which did not fit the door. The groundskeeper's report of Alfred Inglethorpe with a ladder. The second key hidden in Lawrence's book. Each clue seemed to point in conflicting directions. Poirot, however, saw order where I saw chaos. He knelt by the window, his gloved fingers tracing faint scratches on the sill, his expression one of quiet triumph. The household had gathered at Poirot's request, their faces a study in contrasts. John Cavendish, his jaw set, stood rigidly by the fireplace. His wife Mary hovered near the window, her eyes darting nervously. Lawrence, pale and withdrawn, clutched a book as if it were a shield. Alfred Inglethorpe, Emily's widower, stood apart, his expression unreadable, and Cynthia, the young companion, fidgeted with her sleeve, her usual vivacity subdued. Dr. Bauerstein, the local physician, had joined us, his scientific curiosity piqued by Poirot's reputation. Poirot rose, brushing dust from his immaculate trousers. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice low but commanding, "we are here to unravel the enigma of this room. Madame Inglethorpe, she was poisoned. But the door was locked, the key inside. The window, it is high, yet there are marks. We must ask, how did the murderer enter, and how did they leave?" John Cavendish stirred, his voice sharp. "Surely, Poirot, you don't believe someone climbed through that window? It's 20 feet from the ground." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Monsieur Cavendish, the impossible is merely the possible in disguise. Let us examine the facts." He moved to the rug, near the bed, where Dorcas, the housemaid, had found the strange key. Poirot lifted the rug with a flourish, revealing the floor beneath. "This key," he said, holding up the small, tarnished object. "It does not fit the door. Why, then, was it here? A mistake? Non, it is deliberate, a clue to mislead, or to reveal." I glanced at Alfred, whose fingers twitched slightly. Poirot's words seemed to hang in the air, each syllable probing the room's tension. Mary stepped forward, her voice steady but strained. "Mr. Poirot, are you suggesting someone planted that key to confuse us?" "Perhaps," Madame Poirot replied, his gaze fixed on her, "or perhaps it serves another purpose. Let us consider. The window." He crossed to the tall window, its heavy curtains drawn back. The sill bore faint scratches, barely visible in the morning light. Poirot produced a magnifying glass and examined them closely. "These marks," he said, "they are fresh. A tool, perhaps, or a boot. Someone has tampered with this window." Lawrence spoke up, his voice hesitant. "But the window was locked, Mr. Poirot. I checked it myself that night." "Precisement," Poirot said, nodding. "Locked, yet marked. This is significant." Dr. Bauerstein, who had been silent, cleared his throat. "Mr. Poirot, could the window have been forced open without breaking the latch?" Poirot smiled. "An excellent question. Doctor, let us test this theory." He called for a ladder from the groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Wilkins, who had reported seeing Alfred near a ladder the night before Emily's death. Wilkins arrived, his weathered face uneasy as he set the ladder against the outer wall. Poirot, with surprising agility for a man of his stature, climbed to the window, his movements precise. He examined the exterior frame, then descended, his expression thoughtful. "The window," he announced, "could be opened from the outside, with effort. The latch is old, easily manipulated with a thin tool, but the height it requires a ladder or a rope or great daring." Alfred Inglethorpe, who had remained silent, spoke at last, his voice smooth. "This is absurd. Mr. Poirot, are you accusing me of climbing a ladder to poison my wife? I was in my study all evening." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Inglethorpe, the groundskeeper, saw you with a ladder. You deny this?" Alfred's face reddened. "Wilkins is mistaken. I was nowhere near the gardens that night." Wilkins, standing at the door, shifted uncomfortably. "I know what I saw, sir. You was by the shed, carrying a ladder, just after dusk." The room erupted in murmurs. John turned to Alfred, his eyes blazing. "What were you doing, Alfred? Explain yourself." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Patience, Monsieur Cavendish. We must not leap to conclusions. There is another clue to consider. He crossed to the bookshelf where Lawrence had been standing. Poirot's fingers danced over the spines, pausing at a worn volume of poetry. He opened it, revealing a small, gleaming key tucked between the pages. The room fell silent. This key, Poirot said, holding it aloft, was found in Monsieur Lawrence's book. It too does not fit the door, but it fits something else, perhaps. Lawrence flushed, his voice trembling. I don't know how that got there, Mr. Poirot, I swear it. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. Monsieur Lawrence, the truth, it hides, but not for long. This key, it belongs to a small lockbox in this room. I found it yesterday, concealed behind the wardrobe. He moved to the wardrobe, pulling it aside with effort. Behind it was a small, locked box, its surface scratched. Poirot inserted the key, and the box opened, revealing a bundle of papers. He scanned them quickly, his lips tightening. These, he said, are letters, written by Madame Ing. They speak of her fears, her distrust of someone close. But they do not name the person. Cynthia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She suspected someone was trying to harm her. Poirot nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. And these letters, they were hidden, locked away. Why? To protect someone, or to accuse them? The room buzzed with tension. Mary's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly. John paced, his anger barely contained. Alfred's eyes darted to the door, as if contemplating escape. Lawrence stared at the floor, his book forgotten. Poirot closed the box and turned to the group. We must now test the window's accessibility. Monsieur Hastings, assist me. I followed Poirot outside, where the ladder still stood against the wall. The grounds of Styles Court were quiet, the rose gardens bathed in soft light. Poirot climbed the ladder again, this time with a rope he had procured from Wilkins. He tied it to the window frame, testing its strength, then descended. Mon ami, he said, his voice low. It is possible. A person of agility could climb, enter, and leave, locking the window behind them. The scratches, they confirm this. We returned to the room, where Poirot staged his dramatic test. He instructed Wilkins to climb the ladder and attempt to enter through the window. The grounds, though hesitant, complied, his movements slow but steady. After a moment he pushed the window open and climbed inside, proving Poirot's theory. The household watched, stunned. John broke the silence. So the murderer came through the window. But who, Poirot, who would do this? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The method is solved. The window was the entry, the ladder the means, but the who and the why, these remain. We must look to the poison, the will, the letters. All are connected. He turned to Alfred. Monsieur Ing, your presence near the ladder is troubling. But I believe there is more to this. A conspiracy, perhaps. Alfred's composure cracked. This is outrageous. I loved my wife. Poirot's voice was calm but piercing. Love, monsieur, can be a motive as strong as hate. We shall see. The day wore on, with Poirot questioning each member of the household. He spoke to Dorcas, who confirmed seeing Alfred near the shed, though she could not swear to the exact time. He questioned Mary about her movements, noting her evasiveness when asked about the evening of the murder. Cynthia admitted to handling strychnine at the hospital, but insisted she had brought none to Styles. Lawrence, still shaken by the key in his book, claimed ignorance, though his nervous demeanor suggested otherwise. As evening fell, Poirot gathered us in the drawing room. The air was heavy with anticipation. He stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Mies Amos, he said, the locked room. It is no longer a mystery. The murderer entered through the window, using a ladder. The keys, they are distractions, planted to confuse, but the truth, it emerges. The poison, the will, the letters, they point to a motive, a plan. Tomorrow, we shall explore the poison further. For now, rest, but know that Hercule Poirot is close to the truth. The household dispersed, her faces a mix of relief and dread. I lingered, watching Poirot as he stared into the fire, his mind clearly racing. Poirot, I said, do you really believe Alfred is involved, or Lawrence? Those keys, he turned, a faint smile on his lips. Hastings, you see the pieces, but not the picture. The keys, they are important, but not as you think. Trust Poirot. The little grey cells, they do not fail. Chapter 8. The will's secret. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court, casting long shadows across the drawing room where Hercule Poirot sat, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap. His eyes, sharp and gleaming like polished jade, surveyed the room with a quiet intensity. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the investigation pressing on him. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the very walls of the grand estate held their breath, waiting for Poirot's next move. The events of the past days had left the household in a state of uneasy suspense. Emily Inglethorpe's death by strychnine poisoning, the locked room. The cryptic clues, each piece of the puzzle had deepened the mystery, and now, the revelation of a revised will loomed large. Poirot had requested a meeting with the family solicitor, Mr. Wells, to obtain the document, and the household buzzed with speculation about its contents. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, could not shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of a breakthrough. yet the path to truth remained maddeningly obscured. Poirot's voice, crisp and measured, broke the silence. "Mon ami, you are restless. The little grey cells. They must have patience. The will of Madame Inglethorpe, it is the key to the heart of this affair. We shall see it soon, and with it, the truth will begin to unfold." Hastings nodded, though his mind raced. But what if the will reveals nothing new? Alfred is already under suspicion, and the strychnine receipt in his study. Nan, Poirot interrupted, raising a finger. "The receipt, it is a clue, yes, but it is not the whole story. We must not leap to conclusions. The will, Hastings, it will tell us who stood to gain and who stood to lose, and in that, we shall find the motive." Before Hastings could respond, the door opened, and Mr. Wells entered, a thin, bespectacled man with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. John Cavendish followed, his face drawn, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. Behind him came Mary Cavendish, elegant as ever, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Lawrence Cavendish lingered at the rear, his poet's demeanor more subdued than usual, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs of his jacket. "Mr. Wells began, setting the portfolio on the table. "I've brought the document as requested. It's Emily's most recent will, drawn up just a month ago. I must warn you, it's unconventional." Poirot's lips curved into a slight smile. "Unconventional, you say? Bon, that is precisely what I expected. Let us see it, monsieur." Wells opened the portfolio and produced a crisp sheet of parchment, its edges sealed with wax. He handed it to Poirot, who adjusted his pince-nez and began to read, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint rustle of paper as Poirot turned the page. Hastings watched, his heart pounding, as Poirot's eyes darted across the text, absorbing every detail. At last, Poirot set the document down and leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Most interesting," he murmured. "Madame Inglethorpe. She has left the bulk of her fortune Styles Court, the investments, the entirety of her estate to her husband, Monsieur Alfred Inglethorpe. Small bequests are made to her steps, John and Lawrence, but they are, shall we say, modest in comparison." A collective gasp rippled through the room. John's face reddened, his fists clenching at his sides. "That's preposterous," he exclaimed. "Mother always said she'd provide for us equally. She wouldn't leave everything to that fortune hunter." Mary placed a calming hand on her husband's arm, though her own expression was strained. "John, please, let Mr. Poirot explain." Lawrence, standing by the fireplace, looked as though he might faint. "It doesn't make sense," he said softly, almost to himself. "She was planning to revise the will again. She told me so, just last week." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Indeed, Monsieur Lawrence. And what did she say, precisely?" Lawrence hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor. She said she was reconsidering her decisions, that she wanted to ensure fairness. I thought she meant to increase our shares." Poirot nodded slowly, his mind clearly at work. "And yet, this will, it is dated only 1 month ago, signed by Madame Inglethorpe and witnessed by 2 servants. Tell me, Monsieur Wells, who were these witnesses?" Wells adjusted his glasses, consulting a note in his portfolio. "The witnesses were Dorcas, the housemaid, and Annie, the scullery maid, both long-serving members of the household." "Annie," Hastings interjected, frowning, "but she's no longer here." Dorcas mentioned she left abruptly, just days after the mistress's death. Poirot's eyes lit up. "That is a detail of great importance. We must find this Annie. She may hold the key to the authenticity of this will." John paced the room, his frustration boiling over. "Authenticity? Are you suggesting the will is a forgery? That Alfred manipulated her into signing it?" Poirot raised a hand, his tone calm but firm. "I suggest nothing, Monsieur Cavendish. I observe, and what I observe is that this will, it raises questions. The sudden departure of a witness, the timing of its creation, the discontent it has caused. These are threads in the tapestry of this mystery. We must follow them." Mary spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension. "Mr. Poirot, what do you propose? If the will is false, what does it mean for the investigation?" "It means, madame, that we must dig deeper," Poirot replied. "We must find Annie, and we must learn what she knows. Hastings, you will accompany me to the village. Dorcas may know where Annie has gone." The household dispersed, each member grappling with the revelation. John stormed out, muttering about Alfred's treachery, while Mary followed, her expression unreadable. Lawrence lingered by the fireplace, lost in thought, his pale face a mask of worry. Hastings, meanwhile, felt a surge of excitement. Poirot's confidence was infectious, and the prospect of tracking down a missing witness promised to bring them closer to the truth. The village of Styles. St. Mary was a quaint cluster of cottages and shops, its cobblestone streets bustling with morning activity. Poirot and Hastings made their way to the small cottage where Dorcas's sister lived. As Dorcas had mentioned Annie's connection to the family, the air was crisp, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting from a nearby bakery. But focused Beese's system mind was focused solely on the investigation, his steps brisk as he led Hastings through the village. Dorcas's sister, A stout woman named Mrs. Carter welcomed them into her modest parlor. Her face was lined with worry, her hands twisting a dishcloth as she spoke. Annie. Oh, she left in a hurry. She did. Said she couldn't stay at Styles after what happened. Didn't say where she was going, but I've got an address for her. Cousin in Tadminster. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Tadminster, you say? We shall go there at once. This Annie, she may confirm or refute the will's legitimacy. The journey to Tadminster was a short one, the countryside blurring past as Hastings drove Poirot in the estate's motor car. The address led them to a narrow row house, its brick facade weathered but neat. Annie, a nervous young woman with wide eyes, answered the door. Her hands trembled as she invited them inside, her gaze darting between Poirot and Hastings. Mademoiselle Annie, Poirot began, his tone gentle yet probing. You witnessed the signing of Madame Inglethorpe's will, did you not? Annie nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Me and Dorcas, we signed it. Mrs. Inglethorpe asked us to, said it was important. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And you saw her sign it? You are certain? Annie's face paled, her fingers twisting together. Well, I signed it, sir, but I didn't see her sign. Not exactly. Mr. Alfred, he brought the paper to us, said it was all in order. We trusted him. You see, he's the master's husband. Hastings felt a jolt of excitement, but Poirot remained calm, his eyes narrowing. You did not see Madame Inglethorpe sign the will. You are certain of this? Annie's voice wavered. No, sir, it was late, and we were in the servants' hall. Mr. Alfred said she'd signed it upstairs and needed our marks to make it official. I didn't think nothing of it at the time. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but Hastings could sense the wheels turning in his friend's mind. And tell me, mademoiselle, why did you leave Styles so suddenly? Annie's eyes filled with tears. It was Mr. Alfred, sir. He gave me money, a lot of it, and told me to leave. Said it was best for everyone. I was frightened, sir. I didn't know what to do, so I took it and came here. Poirot's voice was sharp now, cutting through the air. How much money, mademoiselle? £10, sir, Annie whispered. More'n I've ever seen. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, his eyes alight with triumph. Mercy, Mademoiselle Annie, you have been most helpful. We shall trouble you no further. As they left the row house, Hastings could barely contain his excitement. Poirot, this is it. Alfred bribed her to lie about the will. It must be a forgery. Poirot nodded, though his expression remained cautious. It is a strong indication, mon ami. A will signed by no one, witnessed by a bribed servant. This is a serious matter, but we must confirm it. We must return to Styles and confront those involved. Back at Styles Court, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Poirot called the family together in the drawing room, the will laid out on the table like an accusation. John, Mary, Lawrence, and Alfred stood, or sat, their faces a mix of dread and curiosity. Alfred, in particular, was unnervingly calm, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes fixed on Poirot with a faint smile. Poirot's voice was steady, commanding the room's attention. Mesdames et messieurs, we have uncovered a grave deception. The will of Madame Inglethorpe, which leaves her fortune to Monsieur Alfred, was not signed by her. One of the witnesses, Annie, has confessed she did not see Madame Inglethorpe sign. She was paid to leave Styles and keep silent. A stunned silence followed, broken by John's furious outburst. I knew it. That scoundrel forged it. He's been after her money, from the start. Alfred's smile didn't waver, though his eyes flickered with something unreadable. This is absurd, Poirot. You've no proof. Annie's a frightened girl. She'd say anything. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. We have her testimony, monsieur, and we have the fact that the will's creation coincided with your late-night meetings, your access to strychnine, and your influence over the household. The threads, they weave a pattern. Mary's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. Mr. Poirot, what does this mean for the estate? If the will is false, who inherits? Poirot's eyes softened slightly. If the will is proven false, the previous will would take precedence, but we are not there yet. Madame, we must ensure every detail is correct. Lawrence, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice trembling. But if Alfred forged it, does that mean he killed her? Poirot held up a hand. Patience, Monsieur Lawrence. The forgery of the will is but one piece of the puzzle. It suggests motive, yes, but the act of murder, that is another matter. We shall proceed with care. The meeting ended with the family in disarray, John pacing, Mary pale, Lawrence withdrawn, and Alfred eerily composed. Hastings followed Poirot to the library, where the detective began scribbling notes, his mind clearly racing. Poirot, Hastings ventured. Do you think Alfred did it? The will, the strychnine, the bribe, it all points to him. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It points, yes, but the picture is not complete. The will is false, that much is clear. But the poison, the locked room, the timing, these require more than a greedy husband. There is another hand at work, mon ami. We must find it. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Poirot interviewed Dorcas again, confirming Annie's a story about the will's signing. He examined the will itself, noting the ink's slight discoloration, suggesting it was written at a different time than claimed. He consulted with Dr. Bauerstein, who confirmed that strychnine could be obtained through less obvious means than a pharmacy receipt, broadening the suspect pool. Every step brought new questions, but Poirot's confidence never wavered. As night fell, Hastings found Poirot in the garden, staring at the stars. "What now, Poirot?" he asked. "Now, mon ami, we set a trap," Poirot replied, his voice low. "The killer is clever, but not as clever as Hercule Poirot. We shall flush them out, and the truth will shine like these stars." The chapter closed with the household in turmoil, the forge will casting a shadow over every interaction. Alfred's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the family's anger and fear, and Poirot's promise of a trap hung in the air, a beacon of hope, amid the darkness of suspicion. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court, casting long wavering shadows across the drawing room where Hercule Poirot stood, his small frame radiating an almost palpable intensity. The household had gathered at his request, their faces a mix of apprehension, curiosity, and barely concealed dread. The air was thick with the weight of the past day's revelations: Emily Inglethorpe's poisoning, the forged will, the mysterious keys, and the ever-shifting web of suspicion that seemed to ensnare each member of the family in turn. Hastings, standing near the fireplace, watched his friend with a familiar blend of admiration and impatience, eager for the next move in Poirot's intricate game. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit, adjusted his tie with a precise flick of his fingers before addressing the room. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm yet commanding, "we stand at a crossroads in this affair. The truth, it is near, so very near. But the murderer, they are clever, Nan. They weave a tapestry of deception, hoping to obscure their guilt. Today, I set a trap to unravel this tapestry, and the guilty one. They will not escape the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot." The room stirred. John Cavendish, his jaw tight, leaned forward in his armchair. "What sort of trap, Poirot? Haven't we had enough games? My stepmother is dead, and we're no closer to knowing who did it." His voice carried a note of frustration, but his eyes darted nervously toward his wife Mary, who sat poised on a velvet settee, her expression unreadable. Mary's lips parted slightly as if to speak, but she remained silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lawrence, standing near the window, shifted uncomfortably, his poet's eyes clouded with unease. Cynthia, perched on a stool, twisted a handkerchief between her fingers, her youthful face pale but resolute. Alfred Inglethorpe, the object of much suspicion, stood apart, his thin frame rigid, his eyes fixed on Poirot with a mixture of defiance and wariness. The servants Dorcas and the young maid Annie hovered near the door, their presence almost forgotten but their ears straining for every word. Poirot raised a hand, silencing John's outburst. "Patience, Monsieur Cavendish. The trap, it is simple but precise. I have let it be known discreetly. You understand that a second vial of poison has been discovered, hidden in the greenhouse. This vial, I say, contains traces of strychnine, and it bears the fingerprints of the one who administered the fatal dose to Madame Inglethorpe, the guilty party. They will be compelled to act, to retrieve or destroy this evidence before it betrays them." Hastings frowned, catching Poirot's eye. "But Poirot," he whispered, leaning closer, "there's no such vial, is there? You're bluffing." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "A bluff, mon ami Nanette, is a strategy. The guilty one, they will believe the vial exists, and in their panic they will reveal themselves. We must watch, Hastings, watch and listen." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group like a fog. John's face darkened and he exchanged a glance with Mary, who gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. Lawrence cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "And if no one takes the bait, Poirot, what then?" "Then," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming, "we learned something else. The absence of action, it too is a clue. But I assure you, someone will move the murderer. They are not so calm as they appear." The household dispersed, each member retreating to their own corner of the sprawling estate, their movements shadowed by suspicion. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, took up a position in the library, where a window overlooked the path to the greenhouse. The detective had arranged for a groundskeeper to keep watch, discreetly hidden among the shrubbery, ready to report any movement. Hastings, restless, paced the room, his mind racing. "Do you really think this will work, Poirot?" he asked, pausing to peer out the window. The greenhouse, a glass structure glinting in the midday sun, stood silent and empty. What if the murderer is too clever to fall for it? Poirot, seated at a small writing desk, was examining a notebook filled with his meticulous handwriting. Clever, yes, but not infallible. The mind of the criminal, it is like a machine, precise but predictable in its flaws. They will act, Hastings, because they must. The fear of discovery, it gnaws at them. Hours passed, the tension in the house growing with each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Hastings, growing restless, suggested they check the greenhouse themselves, but Poirot shook his head. "Nan, we wait. The trap, it is not for us to spring, but for the guilty to stumble into." As evening approached, a soft knock at the library door startled Hastings. It was Dorcas, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Mr. Poirot, sir," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. I saw someone near the greenhouse just now. It was Mr. Alfred, sir. He was creeping along the path, looking all about like he was afraid of being seen. Poirot's eyes lit up, but his voice remained calm. Mercy, Dorcas, you have done well. Tell me, did he enter the greenhouse? Dorcas nodded. Yes, sir. He went inside, and I saw him poking about near the workbench, where the gardening tools are kept. I didn't dare stay longer, for fear he'd see me. Poirot rose, his movements swift and purposeful. Come, Hastings, the fish. He has taken the bait. Let us see what Monsieur Alfred seeks. They hurried to the greenhouse, moving quietly through the twilight. The glass structure loomed ahead, its panes reflecting the fading light. Inside they found Alfred Inglethorpe, his face flushed and his hands fumbling with a small wooden box on the workbench. He froze as Poirot and Hastings entered, his eyes wide with panic. Monsieur Inglethorpe, Poirot said, his voice sharp as a blade, what do you seek in this greenhouse? A vial, perhaps one that does not exist. Alfred's mouth opened, then closed, his composure crumbling. I was merely checking the tools, he stammered. The gardener mentioned something about a broken rake, at this hour. Poirot's tone was laced with mockery. Non, monsieur, you came for the vial I spoke of, did you not? You feared it would bear your fingerprints, linking you to the poison that killed your wife? Alfred's face drained of color, and he took a step back, his hands raised as if to ward off the accusation. That's absurd. I had nothing to do with Emily's death. I loved her. Then why? Poirot pressed, stepping closer. Did we find a pharmacy receipt for strychnine in your study? Why did Dorcas see you leaving the house late at night, before Madame Inglethorpe's death? And why, monsieur, are you here, in this greenhouse, searching for a vial that you believe holds the key to your guilt? Alfred's eyes darted to the door, as if calculating his chances of escape. Hastings, sensing the movement, stepped to block the exit. Answer him, Alfred, he said, his voice firm. If you're innocent, explain yourself. For a moment, it seemed Alfred might bolt, but then his shoulders sagged, and he sank onto a nearby stool. All right, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I did buy strychnine, but not for Emily. It was for the rats in the attic. The house has been plagued with them. I didn't want to trouble Emily with it, so I handled it myself. Poirot's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained skeptical. Rats, monsieur, a convenient excuse. And the late-night outings, the secrecy. How do you explain these? Alfred hesitated, his hands twisting together. I was meeting someone. Not for anything sinister, I swear. It was Evelyn Howard. She wanted to reconcile with Emily, but she was too proud to come to the house openly. I met her in the village, to discuss it. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who nodded slightly, as if filing the information away. Evelyn Howard, Poirot mused. The former companion who quarreled with Madame Inglethorpe. We shall verify this, monsieur. But tell me, why the panic over this vial? Why come here tonight? Alfred's eyes flickered with something like fear. I heard what you said about the fingerprints. I thought someone might have planted something to frame me. I couldn't risk it. Poirot studied him for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Then, with a sudden movement, he turned to the workbench and opened the wooden box Alfred had been examining. Inside was nothing but gardening tools, a trowel, a pair of shears, and a coil of twine. Poirot closed the box with a snap. No vial, monsieur. As I said, it was a fiction. But your actions, they speak loudly. Before Alfred could respond, a shout came from outside. The groundskeeper, a burly man named Thomas, burst into the greenhouse, his face flushed with excitement. Mr. Poirot, I saw someone else near the house, by the servants' entrance. It was Mrs. Cavendish, sir. She was hurrying away, carrying something in her hand. Poirot's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. Madame Cavendish. What did she carry? I couldn't see clear, sir, but it looked like a small bottle or jar. She tucked it in her shawl and ran off toward the woods. Hastings felt a jolt of shock. Mary, but why would she? Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. Quickly, Hastings, we must find her. Monsieur Inglethorpe, you will remain here with Thomas. Do not move. Leaving Alfred under the groundskeeper's watchful eye, Poirot and Hastings raced toward the woods, the darkness closing in around them. The path was narrow, lined with gnarled trees that seemed to whisper secrets as they passed. Hastings' mind raced. Mary Cavendish, so composed, so elegant, involved in this sordid affair. It seemed unthinkable, yet Poirot's urgency suggested he had suspected her all along. They found Mary near a small clearing, her figure illuminated by the faint glow of a lantern she carried. She stood motionless, staring at something in her hand, a small glass bottle, its contents glinting in the light. As Poirot and Hastings approached, she started, nearly dropping the bottle. Madame Cavendish, Poirot said, his voice low but firm. What is this you hold? Another piece of the puzzle, perhaps. Mary's face was pale, her eyes wide with something like panic. It's nothing, she said quickly, her voice trembling. Just some medicine, for my headaches. Poirot stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the bottle. Medicine, madame, or something more deadly. Permit me to see it. Reluctantly, Mary handed over the bottle. Poirot held it up to the lantern, squinting at the label. Strychnine, he said softly. his voice heavy with meaning. The same poison that killed Madame Inglethorpe. And yet, you tell me it is for headaches. Mary's composure cracked, her hands trembling. I didn't kill her, she cried, her voice breaking. I swear it, Poirot. I found this in the house, hidden in the pantry, I thought it might be important, so I took it to keep it safe. Safe, Poirot's tone was sharp. Or to conceal it. Madame, your movements this evening, they are most curious. Why flee to the woods? Why not bring this to me at once? Mary's eyes filled with tears, and she sank onto a fallen log, her shoulders shaking. I was afraid, she whispered. I've been afraid for so long. John has been so distant, so consumed with the estate, with Emily's money. I thought if I found something I could protect him, protect us. Hastings, moved by her distress, stepped forward, but Poirot held up a hand. Madame, your words, they are touching, but they do not explain everything. Where were you on the night of Madame Inglethorpe's death? Your husband, he says you were in your room, but the maid Annie, she saw you in the corridor near Madame Inglethorpe's door. Mary's head jerked up, her eyes wide with shock. Annie, she's mistaken. I was in my room all night. I swear. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. We shall see, Madame, for now. This bottle, it is evidence. You will return with us to the house, and we will speak further. As they made their way back to Styles Court, the bottle safely tucked in Poirot's pocket, Hastings' mind whirled with questions. Was Mary telling the truth, or was she the mastermind behind Emily's death? And what of Alfred, caught red in the greenhouse? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. Back at the house, Poirot gathered the household once more in the drawing room. The atmosphere was electric, every face taut with anticipation. Alfred, escorted by Thomas, stood sullenly in a corner, his earlier defiance replaced by a weary resignation. Mary sat apart, her eyes downcast. The bottle now placed on a table before Poirot like an accusation. Ladies and gentlemen, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tension. The trap has been sprung, and the results they are illuminating. Monsieur Inglethorpe, you sought to protect yourself from a fictional vial, revealing your fear of discovery. Madame Cavendish, you have produced a bottle of strychnine claiming it was found by chance. But there is more to this affair than meets the eye. He paused, letting his words sink in. John, his face flushed with anger, stood up. This is outrageous, Poirot. Are you accusing my wife? My stepmother trusted Mary. She'd never do such a thing. Poirot raised a hand, his expression unyielding. Monsieur Cavendish, I accuse no one yet, but the facts, they speak. The strychnine, the forged will, the locked room, the hidden letter all point to a conspiracy, one woven with care and cunning. Tonight, I will name the true killer, but first I must ask you all to remain here. No one leaves this room. The household exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with suspicion. Cynthia, her voice trembling, spoke up. Mr. Poirot, please just tell us, who did it? Who killed Mrs. Inglethorpe? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. Patience, mademoiselle. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it must be savored. But rest assured, the little grey cells, they have not failed. The killer, they are among us, and before this night is over, they will be revealed. As the clock struck midnight, the household waited, their fates hanging in the balance, while Poirot's mind worked tirelessly, weaving together the final threads of the mystery that had consumed Styles Court. The night stretched on, each minute heavy with expectation. Poirot moved about the room, his eyes darting from one face to another, as if reading their thoughts. Hastings, seated near the door, felt his heart pound with anticipation. He had seen Poirot unravel mysteries before, but this case, with its tangled motives and hidden truths, seemed to test even his friend's formidable intellect. Poirot stopped before the fireplace, where the burnt fragment of paper had been found. Days earlier, he picked up the poker, tapping it lightly against his palm as he spoke. Let us review Ms. Amos. Madame Inglethorpe died of strychnine poisoning, administered through her coffee. The room was locked, the key found under the rug, a key that did not fit the door. A forged will named Monsieur Alfred as the primary heir, yet the servants who witnessed it were coerced. A letter, hidden in a vase, spoke of betrayal. And now, we have a bottle of strychnine found by Madame Cavendish, and Monsieur Inglethorpe's suspicious behavior in the greenhouse. He turned to Alfred, who flinched. Under his gaze, Monsieur, your story of rats and secret meetings, it is plausible, but not convincing. The receipt in your study, it is too convenient, and yet, you lacked the opportunity to administer the poison, as you were seen in the village that evening. Alfred's face tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the floor. Turned to Mary, his expression softening but still probing. Madame Cavendish, your devotion to your husband, it is admirable, but your actions tonight, fleeing with a bottle of poison, claiming it was found by chance, they raise questions. The maid Annie places you near Madame Inglethorpe's room that night. Why? Mary's voice was barely a whisper. I told you, Annie is mistaken. I was in my room. I found the bottle today, in the pantry, hidden behind some jars. I thought it might clear things up. Poirot nodded, but his eyes were unyielding. And yet, Madame, You did not bring it to me at once. You ran to the woods as if to hide it. Why?" Mary's hands twisted in her lap, her composure fraying. "I was afraid, Poirot, afraid of what it meant. I didn't want John to be blamed." John, his face red with anger, stepped forward. "This is nonsense. Mary's done nothing wrong. If anyone's to blame, it's Alfred, with his sneaking about and his damned strychnine receipt." Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "Monsieur Cavendish, your loyalty, it is noted. But the truth, it does not bend to passion. There is one among us who has orchestrated this crime with great care of mind, both cunning and desperate, and that mind, it has made a mistake." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the faint ticking of the clock. Cynthia, her eyes wide, leaned forward. "What mistake, Mr. Poirot? What have you found?" Poirot smiled, a small triumphant curve of his lips. "The mistake, mademoiselle, lies in the timing. The strychnine, it was administered in the coffee, yes, but its effects were delayed. This suggests a sleeping powder, used to mask the poisons. Onset, and who among us has access to such a powder?" His eyes flicked to Cynthia, who gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Not me. I told you, I handle medicines at the hospital, but I'd never peace, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "Gently, I do not accuse you, but the powder, it was found in your room, was it not? A small vial easily overlooked. Yet it tells me something important. The killer knew how to delay the poison's effects, a knowledge not common to all." Lawrence, who had been silent, spoke up, his voice trembling. "Are you saying it was a professional? Someone with medical knowledge?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, monsieur, or perhaps someone clever enough to learn the killer. They planned this crime with precision, but they could not foresee every detail. The burnt paper, the hidden letter, the forged will, these are the threads of their unraveling." He turned to the table, picking up the bottle Mary had produced. "This bottle, it is a clue, but not the final one. The true key lies in the motive. Why kill Madame Inglethorpe? For money, for revenge, for love? The answer, it is close." The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on Poirot. Hastings, his heart racing, felt a surge of excitement. This was the moment, Poirot's grand revelation, the culmination of his meticulous work. But even as he waited, a nagging doubt lingered. Was it Mary, driven by desperation? Alfred, with his suspicious behavior? Or someone else, hidden in plain sight? Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "The forged will," he said. "It was meant to point to Monsieur Alfred, to make him the obvious suspect. But why forge a will at all? If the killer stood to gain, why not let the original will stand? The answer, Ms. Amos, is that the killer wished to control the narrative, to direct our suspicions, and in doing so they revealed their hand." He stopped before Mary, his eyes locking with hers. "Madame Cavendish, your marriage, it has been strained, has it not? The estate, it is a heavy burden. Madame Inglethorpe's wealth, it could have eased that burden, could it not?" Mary's face paled, but she held his gaze. "I won't deny our troubles, Poirot, but I didn't kill Emily. I couldn't." Chapter 10. The final revelation. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Styles Court's drawing room, casting long wavering shadows across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to every surface, as though the very walls held their breath. The household had gathered at Hercule Poirot's summons, each member seated in a semicircle of her-backed chairs arranged with precision by the little Belgian detective himself. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal observer, stood near the fireplace, his eyes darting between the faces of the assembled company. John Cavendish, his jaw tight with unease. Lawrence Cavendish, fidgeting with a pen in his hand. Alfred Ingle, pale but composed, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Cynthia Murdoch, her youthful face clouded with worry. And Mary Cavendish, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the room. The servants, Dorcas, the housemaid, and the butler, Manning, hovered near the doorway, their presence a quiet reminder of the estate's daily rhythms, now disrupted by the spectre of murder. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His mustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the group, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man who had already glimpsed the truth. He clasped his hands behind his back, his voice steady and deliberate as he began. "Ms. Amos," he said, his accent lending a musical cadence to the words, "we are gathered here to bring to light the truth behind the tragic death of Madame Emily Ingle. It is a truth that has been obscured by lies, by misdirection, and by the clever machinations of a mind most cunning. But Hercule Poirot does not permit the truth to remain hidden. The little grey cells, they have worked tirelessly and now, they have prevailed." A murmur rippled through the room. John shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Get on with it, Poirot," he said, his voice edged with impatience. "We've been through enough. Who did it?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him with a gentle but firm gesture. "Patience, Monsieur Cavendish. The truth is like a fine tapestry. It must be unraveled thread by thread, or the pattern is lost. We begin with the facts." He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. Madame Inglethorpe died in the early hours of the morning, poisoned by strychnine. Her bedroom was locked from the inside, the windows secured, and yet the poison was administered. The coffee cup beside her bed contained traces of the poison, suggesting it was the vehicle of death. But how, and by whom? These are the questions that have haunted us. Hastings watched as Poirot's gaze swept over the room, lingering on each face as though testing their resolve. He paused near Alfred Inglethorpe, whose calm demeanor seemed almost unnatural under the weight of suspicion. "Monsieur Inglethorpe," Poirot said, "you have been the focus of much scrutiny. A pharmacy receipt for strychnine was found in your study. Your late-night wanderings were noted by the housemaid Dorcas, and the will, which left the bulk of Madame Inglethorpe's fortune to you, appeared to many as a motive most compelling." Alfred's lips tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes meeting Poirot's with a quiet defiance. Mary, seated beside him, leaned forward, her voice sharp. "This is absurd, Poirot. Alfred loved Emily. He would never harm her." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging her words. "Perhaps Madame Cavendish, but let us consider the evidence. The receipt, it is true, was found in Monsieur Inglethorpe's study, yet it was curiously placed, too obvious perhaps, as though meant to be found. And the will, witnessed by 2 servants, one of whom has since disappeared, was revealed to be a forgery, a clever forgery, but a forgery nonetheless." A gasp escaped Cynthia, her hand flying to her mouth. "A forgery," she whispered. "But who would do such a thing?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "That, Mademoiselle Murdoch, is the heart of the matter. The will was designed to cast suspicion, to muddy the waters. But it was not the only misdirection. Let us turn to the locked room, a puzzle most intriguing. The key found under the rug did not fit Madame Inglethorpe's door, and the scratches near the window suggested an entry or an exit through a means other than the door. He moved to the fireplace, where a small pile of ashes still lingered from his earlier examination. The burnt fragment of paper, the hidden letter in the vase, the mysterious stranger seen near the estate. These were threads in the tapestry, but they were not the whole picture. The true clue lay in the timing of the poison's effect. Dr. Bauerstein, who had joined the gathering at Poirot's request, nodded from his seat near the window. "Strychnine acts quickly," he said, his voice clinical. "Within an hour, perhaps 2. Yet Madame Inglethorpe showed symptoms hours after her coffee was served." "Precisely," Poirot said, snapping his fingers. "And this is where the brilliance of the crime reveals itself. The poison was not in the coffee when it was served. It was delayed, administered through a method most ingenious." Hastings felt a chill run through him. He had seen Poirot unravel cases before, but the precision of his reasoning never failed to astonish. "Delayed?" he asked. "How is that possible?" Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. "The sleeping powder, mon ami. A vial was found in Mademoiselle Murdoch's room, but it was not used to sedate Madame Inglethorpe. It was used to coat the strychnine, creating a delay in its release into her system. The coffee cup was a distraction, a sleight of hand to make us believe the poison was administered that evening. In truth, it was given earlier, in a form that ensured its effect would not manifest until the night." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. Mary's face paled, her hands clenching in her lap. John's eyes narrowed, his voice low. "Are you saying someone planned this down to the minute?" "Not someone, Monsieur Cavendish," Poirot said, his tone hardening. "The murderer, and the murderer is among us." He turned, his gaze locking onto Mary Cavendish. "Madame Cavendish, your devotion to your husband is admirable. Your defense of Monsieur Inglethorpe, too, has been noted, but your movements on the night of the murder have been elusive." Mary's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she composed herself. "I was in my room," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I told you that you did," Poirot said, stepping closer. "But the gardener saw you near the conservatory that evening, carrying a small case, and the gloves you wore that day, madame, they bore traces of strychnine, not much, but enough for the little grey cells to take notice." A collective gasp filled the room. John stood, his face red with anger. "This is outrageous." "Mary would never sit, Monsieur Cavendish," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the outburst like a blade. "The truth does not bend to emotion. Madame Cavendish, you knew of your husband's financial troubles. You knew that Madame Ingle's fortune would pass to him and his brother only if her new will was invalidated. And so, you acted." Mary's composure cracked, her lips trembling. "You have no proof," she whispered. Poirot reached into his pocket, producing a small envelope. "The letter in the vase, madame, was not written by Madame Inglethorpe to her lawyer, as we first believed. It was a draft, in your handwriting, designed to mimic her style. You intended to use it to cast suspicion on Monsieur Inglethorpe, but you could not destroy it entirely, could you? The fragments remained, and they betrayed you." He held up a pair of gloves, carefully sealed in a glassine bag, "and these, found in the laundry, bore the chemical traces I spoke of. The sleeping powder, the strychnine, they were your tools, madame. You coated the poison, you ensured its delay, and you manipulated Monsieur Inglethorpe into providing the receipt, knowing his greed would make him the perfect scapegoat." Alfred Inglethorpe stirred, his voice low but clear. "I told you, Mary, it was too risky. You should have listened." The room erupted. John lunged toward Alfred, only to be restrained by Lawrence and Dr. Bauerstein. Cynthia burst into tears, her hands covering her face. Dorcas and Manning exchanged shocked glances, their loyalty to the household shaken. Mary stood, her face a mask of defiance. "You can't prove any of this," she said, her voice rising. "You're guessing, Poirot. You're weaving a story." Poirot shook his head, his expression almost sorrowful. "Non, madame. The little grey cells do not guess. They observe, they deduce, they conclude. You poisoned Madame Inglethorpe to secure the estate for your husband, driven by jealousy of her control and desperation for his future. You used Monsieur Inglethorpe as your pawn, planting evidence to ensure his guilt. But you could not foresee the thoroughness of Hercule Poirot." He turned to the group, his voice softening. "The case is closed. The police have been informed, and they will take Madame Cavendish into custody. Justice it is served, though it brings no joy to poor—" Mary's shoulders slumped, and in that moment, the fight seemed to drain from her. She sank back into her chair, her voice barely a whisper. "I did it for John," she said. "He was losing everything. I couldn't let that happen." John's face crumpled, his anger giving way to anguish. "Mary," he said, his voice breaking, "why didn't you tell me?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted to save you." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Poirot stepped back, his work complete, his eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction tempered by the weight of human frailty. Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt a surge of admiration for his friend. Poirot had seen through the web of lies, the tangled motives, and the carefully laid traps, bringing clarity to chaos with nothing but his intellect and his unrelenting pursuit of truth. As the police arrived, their footsteps echoing in the hall, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Mon ami," he said softly, "the human heart, it is a complex thing. It drives us to great deeds and to great crimes, but always, the truth will find its way." Hastings nodded, unable to find words. The household dispersed, some in tears, others in stunned silence, as Mary was led away. Styles Court, once a place of grandeur, now felt hollow, its secrets laid bare. Poirot adjusted his coat, his mustache twitching one final time, and walked toward the door, leaving behind a mystery fully resolved and a legacy of brilliance that Hastings knew he would never forget. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting Styles Court into shadow, and with it, the final chapter of Emily Inglethorpe's tragic tale came to a close.